Romantic Tales. Chapter 31. Baligaju met his gaze and slightly narrowed his eyes. His eyes were full of warning. Nangong Lai abruptly swallowed his words. Shaking off the goosebumps on his body, he looked at him without blinking. His Highness was addicted to playing the role of a poor student. He lazily raised his phoenix eyes and stroked Hellion Vivian's lips with his finger. His seductive aura was wanton. When the compensation is in place, I will naturally give you other services. Other services? After hearing these words, which made people think of flirtatious thoughts, the surrounding ladies felt as if they were standing on a stove and being handcuffed by fire. Their cheeks were boiling red. The teacher was so angry that he couldn't speak. He patted his chest. You. Hellion Vivian expressed her innocence. She just wanted the other party to stop chasing her like an evil ghost. She had no intention of letting the other party pay with his body. What was with this feeling of a brothel? Separate. Quickly separate. The teacher held a ruler and crazily slammed the wooden table. Where do you think this is? This is the ancestral hall, not a brothel. Openly defying the order of the ancestral hall. You. The teacher pointed at Nangong Lai, Baligaju and Hellion Vivian with trembling fingers. He angrily roared, "Get out of here. Face the wall and reflect." At this moment, a gentle and clean low laugh came from outside the room. It was Tusufeng. Dean. The teacher immediately straightened his back. Baligaju's pupils sank and returned to his usual cold and frosty appearance. Wei furrowed her eyebrows. Was it her misperception? Why did she feel that the dean's gaze on her was very meaningful? It seems that you have already had a preliminary exchange before I came. Tusufeng surveyed the surroundings and then fixed his gaze on the three people. Not only did he not pursue the matter, he instead curled his lips in satisfaction. Seeing everyone so close to each other, I feel very gratified. Hearing this, the corners of everyone's mouths twitched. Dean, which pair of eyes did you see them being lovey-dovey? That's clearly mutual hatred. Tusufeng was still smiling. His gaze seemed to sweep past Hellion Vivian. Interesting that iceberg nephew of his could actually tolerate this little girl to live. According to a normal situation, blood should have been spilled here. After all, with that brat's temper, other than the retired emperor, he never cared about anyone else. Not simple. Perhaps he should properly investigate this little girl's identity. Perhaps something interesting would happen. As if he had seen an interesting program, the corners of Tusufeng's mouth curled up slightly. Then he put his left hand on his right hand and patted it. All right, now line up. What are you doing? Ever since Tusufeng came in, Nangong Lai became a little more serious, but his tone was still charming. Little Baldy, who was standing next to Tusufeng, glared at him fiercely. Then with a kick he sent him flying. After Nangong Lai jumped up, he seemed to have thought of something. The name that was at the tip of his tongue quickly turned into the word you. Little Baldy's face was expressionless. He ate the meat bun in his hand and warned in a dignified manner, "Those who question the dean die." The more Hellion Vivian looked at him, the more she felt that this little Baldy was extremely cute. She really wanted to reach out and pinch him. Unfortunately, little Baldy's vigilance was too strong. It seemed that apart from the dean, he was extremely cold and overbearing to anyone who tried to get close to him. Why did she feel that he was a bit like that person? Hellion Vivian glanced at Baligaju's direction. The more she looked, the more she felt that the two people looked a bit alike. But after carefully calculating their ages, she felt that it was impossible. Even if this man's aura was strong, he was still only a 17 or 18-year-old youth. No matter how precocious he was, it was impossible for him to give birth to a 5 or 6-year-old baby. However, what Hellion Vivian cared about the most was Tusufeng's attitude. This seemingly gentle and harmless dean had a faint smile from beginning to end. It seemed that no matter what happened around him, he could remain calm and collected. A person who was able to do this was absolutely not as simple as a dean of an academy. Seeming to have noticed Wei's gaze, Tusufeng beamed as he looked at her and continued to speak. It seems that everyone is very curious about my upcoming arrangements. This year's White Academy's regulations will be different from previous years. In a moment, you guys and the new students from the excellent, good and good courtyards will work together to determine the courses that you'll be majoring in the future. This course you guys can choose according to your own ideas. However, there is one point. Once you have chosen, you must compete in the new student exam 1 month from now. Those who do not pass, unfortunately, will lose the qualifications to be a student. This news was undoubtedly explosive to the new students of the inferior compound. Everyone was stunned and looked at each other blankly. And Tu Sufeng seemed to feel that this stimulation was not enough. He rubbed his chin and added, "Oh, I forgot to say. The passing rate is only 30%. I wish you all good luck." Only 30% passing rate. No matter if it was the new students of the inferior compound or the other 3 courtyards, they all became alarmed. Thus, the major course to choose was especially important. If you chose correctly, you may be able to pass. If you did not have eyes and chose martial cheek as your major, you will definitely die an ugly death during the exam. This year it seems that there are quite a few people who are very difficult to deal with. That Murong Chongfeng and that Helian Jiaoer, they are all too powerful. They are simply the best candidates for geniuses. Seems that choosing martial chi as your major will be very bad. That's only natural. People like us better not go and throw away our lives. Next, Helian Vivian. The headmaster's deep and aged voice interrupted the whispers around him. Helian Vivian lazily stretched her waist and placed her hand on the back of her neck. She moved her hands left and right in a handsome manner, then walked towards the master. The master flipped through the old yellow scroll in his hand. Seeing that it was a new student of the inferior compound, he did not raise his head and pointed to the side. "Medicine refinement is over there. You can directly go over." Helian Vivian did not move at all. She lowered her eyes and looked at the master in front of her. Her tone was indifferent. "I chose martial chi, not medicine refinement." "What did you say? You want to choose martial chi?" The master did not dare to believe what he had heard. He unconsciously raised his voice by a few decibels. In an instant, everyone's eyes were focused on Helian Vivian. They all roared with laughter. Is this trash an idiot? A person who scored 0 in the exam actually dares to major in martial chi? What is she going to do? Looking for abuse? Even if she wants to attract other people's attention, there is no need to use this kind of method, right? Sure enough, she is a love-struck fool. She would do anything for Lord Murong. You're saying that she is doing all this for Murong Chongfeng? Suddenly, a sinister chuckle entered the room without warning. Chapter 32. The young girls who were gossiping excitedly suddenly blushed. They shyly looked at Nangong Lai's handsome face and whispered, "Does young master know? That woman is very clingy to Lord Murong. Every day she thinks of ways to surround Lord Murong. She annoyed Lord Murong so much that he broke off the engagement. Yet she still shamelessly followed him to White Academy. Now she must have heard that Lord Murong wants to major in martial chi. That's why she fearlessly went to sign up." "Is that so?" Nangong Lai curved his thin lips and glanced at the man beside him. His tone carried a sense of schadenfreude. It sounds like they really have deep feelings for each other. Beligaju's hand that was holding the teacup paused. The water in the teacup stirred up a layer of faintly discernible water stains. In the distance, Murong Chongfeng, who was being discussed as a target, was introducing the Helian Jiaoer to several masters. At this moment he saw that the masters' gazes were all looking at him thoughtfully. He only felt a burst of embarrassment. When the Helian Jiaoer saw this, she turned her eyes. Her beautiful eyes rippled. "Lord Murong, don't blame sister. Her martial chi is not good. Her heart is also anxious, so she thought of such a countermeasure. I'm afraid she wants to borrow Lord Murong's glory." "Trash will always be trash," Murong Chongfeng indifferently said, as if he was only stating a fact. However, he didn't notice that Grandmaster Zizun, who was sitting at the top, was furrowing his brows. He seemed to be doing his best to suppress the anger in his heart. Trash? This group of blind little brats dared to call his good disciple a piece of trash. She was trash, then they were mud. They couldn't even be called objects. "Zizun, this is the disciple I mentioned to you before. Come Chongfeng. Quickly come and greet the master." Murong Chongfeng was delighted. He was just about to step forward and salute. Zizun coldly interrupted him. "This old man can't accept Lord Murong's compliments. That year wasn't the Helian family destroyed by such compliments? This old man can forget about it." Everyone stared blankly. They really didn't understand why Zizun was fine just now, but now his temper suddenly flared up. Furthermore, he even mentioned the Helian family. The smile on Murong Chongfeng's face was also somewhat stiff. He was the noble heir of the prince's mansion. When had he ever received this kind of treatment? However, he knew that the person in front of him was not someone else, but rather the sovereign who was known as the state preceptor. This old man's temper was even more unpredictable than his master's. It was hard to please him. The Hellion Jiao wholeheartedly wanted to help Murong Xiaofeng out of this predicament. She spoke in a clear and melodious voice. Great Master mentioned the Hellion family. Do you know my father? Of course I know. The supreme martial artist slowly stroked his white beard. The Hellion Jiao smiled and was about to use this opportunity to get closer to him. The supreme martial artist continued coldly. After marrying into the family, you still don't know your place. Bringing an outsider into the family is a classic example of betraying kindness. How can this old man not recognize you? Finishing his words, Jizun stood up, flicked his sleeves and left. Although that disciple of his didn't say anything, he, the supreme being, wasn't senile. Obviously they were both daughters of the Hellion family. One lived such a pampered and comfortable life, while the other had to earn her own money to pay the entrance fee. What kind of character Hellion Guangyao was, one could see clearly from this matter. However, I have to thank them for their ruthlessness. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to meet my dear disciple so quickly. And that Murong Chongfeng, I'm sure my disciple has already clearly seen his nature and knows that this kind of man is not acceptable. Thinking like this, the supreme martial artist more or less felt a little better. His disciple was a natural-born genius. A man who could match her must also be unique in this world. That's right. Some time ago, didn't the retired emperor say that he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to choose a consort for that stinky brat who only knows how to lie in the ghost palace all day? Maybe I can let my disciple go and try. The supreme martial artist muttered to himself while secretly thinking in his heart. Speaking of which, that stinky brat should have already entered the superior compound. Why didn't he see him at the superior compound after 2 days? Could it be that he didn't enter the superior compound? No, that's impossible. No matter how arrogant that stinky brat is, he still more or less listens to the retired emperor's words. Moreover, when he was asked to re-enter the superior compound, he had a "it doesn't matter, it's just a change of place to sleep" attitude. He shouldn't have not come. Then where in the world is he now? The test results are no. The teacher held the ancient scroll in his hand. The entire page was completely blank. He raised his head and looked at the tall figure in front of him. His eyebrows furrowed. You haven't tested even once before. Yes. Beligaju answered indifferently. The light and shadow passed through the branches and shattered on his face. Under the reflection of the morning sun, his bright and clean chin appeared even more arrogant and handsome. The teacher really couldn't stand these new students from the inferior compound. He waved his hand. Since it's like this, you go to the crystal ball and test it first. Then decide what you want to major in. No need. Beligage's voice was cold, without the slightest trace of emotion. I choose martial qi. Another person from the inferior compound wants to major in martial qi. The teacher's heart was already blocked to a certain extent. Holding the brush in his hand, his face turned green as he growled. Next. The next one was Nangong Lai. Needless to say, you also want to choose martial qi, right? Nangong Lai wickedly shook his finger. The teacher thought that there was finally someone who knew his place. He was just about to take the medicine. He heard the person laugh hedonistically. I want to choose divination. Said that there are a lot of girls there. The teacher was speechless. Are you here to learn something or to pick up girls? No matter what, in a compound with the worst aptitude, there were actually 2 people who whimsically chose martial qi. And the other person even more strangely chose divination. One must know that in the Dragon War Empire, divination masters were the same as martial cultivation masters. Both were very selective. Not everyone could master it. Was this person sure that he could? Or was it that he only chose divination for the sake of showing off? These people from the inferior compound were simply too much. This year's new students are really a mix of good and bad. The teacher recorded while shaking his head. Don't say that he had thoughts about the new students from the inferior compound. It was because their foundation was too poor. During the test, they wouldn't be given any opportunity to shrink back. Another teacher disdainfully curled his lips. Perhaps this is the difference between the inferior compound and the superior compound. Some people just don't know the height of the heavens and the depth of the earth. They are too arrogant. The superior compound is different. My God, you don't know how high that Hellion Jiaoer's martial chi is. For the academy it can be considered a pleasant surprise. No wonder the dean looked so happy recently. Unlike those 3 people from the inferior compound, they were simply too arrogant. It was estimated that they didn't need to wait until a month later. They would be eliminated in advance during the test. The result was already very obvious. These 3 people simply wouldn't be able to go far. Chapter 33. At night, in the worst courtyard of the White Academy, the young girl flipped her hands, and the surroundings seemed to have a transparent airflow, covering her entire body. Yuan Ming's arrogant voice was full of surprise. Woman, I didn't expect you to be a manipulation-type martial artist. Manipulation-type martial artist? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. In her memory, martial artists were only divided into stages: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The higher the stage, the darker the color of martial chi. What was a manipulation-type martial artist? This was the first time she heard of it. Yuan Ming looked at her, the corners of his mouth half-curved. According to the average person's point of view, the element and color of martial chi determines the level of a martial artist's ability. The lighter the color, the worse the aptitude. But, speaking to this point, he paused, his lips carrying an evil smile. Manipulation-type martial artists are the only exception in the world. Not only are they not in the 5 elements, even when emitting martial chi they don't have any color, but they can manipulate the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. They are the martial artist with the strongest attack power. Sounds good. Hellion Vivian lazily put a strawberry in her mouth, and casually took the wooden basin. Yuan Ming saw her so calm and couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. Did this woman know what the innate talent she possessed meant? It was simply a reckless waste of natural resources. It wasn't that Wei didn't care at all, but her whole body was sticky and flustered, so she wanted to take a bath. In order to avoid seeing anything that she shouldn't see again, before she entered the hot spring pool, she deliberately knocked on the door and looked around. She guessed that everyone should be busy practicing martial chi right now and practicing martial chi, so there shouldn't be anyone else coming. Only then did she undo her clothes and step into the clear pool. The pool water was up to her neck. Wei didn't move at all, so quiet that it was as if she was sleeping. Her silk-like black hair draped over her porcelain white back just like that, appearing exceptionally alluring. Just at this moment, a cold air suddenly approached. There was someone. Hellion Vivian abruptly opened her eyes. Her hands pushed against the side of the pool, and in an instant she jumped out of the wooden barrel. A white cotton gown that was placed beside the pool flew up into the air. Hellion Vivian flipped sideways, and her hands and feet drilled into the gown in an instant. His left hand reached out from his sleeve and just happened to tie the last belt of his clothes. The whole movement was smooth and swift, and the water droplets on his hair gradually dripped everywhere. At this time, a shadow gradually appeared in the fog. That person was icy cold, aloof and proud. She stood alone, and her beauty was untainted by a single speck of dust. He was holding an ancient scroll in his hand, standing by the edge of the pool and looking down. His left shoulder was outlined by a black line. It was so beautiful that even the heavens and the earth were eclipsed. Who else could it be but Beligaju? When Hellion Vivian saw that it was him, she took her things and was about to leave. Unexpectedly, the sky and earth spun. The moment she stretched out her hand, Beligaju pressed her whole body against the stone wall. In an instant, the man's simple and elegant orchid scent entered her nose. It was not thick and there was no smell of dust. It was not like the orchid scent in the bathroom. The fragrance was long and it was rather heavy and simple. He supported his arms on both sides of her. His dark hair was like the best brocade, coldly rubbing against her face, blocking the dim light. What are you doing? Hellion Vivian did not expect that he would do such a thing. Her long, shapely eyebrows slightly raised. Wasn't the conflict between her and him already resolved? Beligaju looked at her. His gaze moved inch by inch from her wet hair to her neck collarbone and his eyes darkened. I said that I will give you more services. The man's voice was deep and his pair of eyes were so deep that it was easy for people to fall into them. His slightly hot breath sprayed on her slender body, scorching and seductive, making her feel numb and itchy. Since you paid me, of course I have to keep my word. Otherwise, how can I be worthy of your 20 taels? His voice was clear, but his evil smile was bewitching. Hearing this, Wei Wei stared blankly for a moment. Like lightning, she reached out and held Bailey Jiaju's wrist. After that, she gently pushed him away. The corners of her mouth carried a smile. That day was merely an accident. It's only right for me to pay you money. You don't need to do anything else. Hearing the 4 words, keep your distance, Bailey Jiaju suddenly laughed, but that smile didn't reach his eyes. His amber pupils were suffused with an ice-cold light. Hellion Vivian did not look at him again. She turned around and walked out of the bamboo house to avoid any bad rumors. She was fine with it, but she didn't like to implicate others. After all, in ancient times, reputation was very important. These people spent so much energy and money to enter the school. First, they wanted to succeed in this place. Second, they wanted to make friends with the upper class. Among these girls, many of them wanted to fly up the branch and become a phoenix. Who was close to whom, who could not be offended, and who must be fawned over, everyone knew in their hearts. So, she had a premonition that Hellion Jiaoer and her group would not let her go so easily. The night outside the window was getting darker and darker. It was so heavy that it seemed like splashed ink couldn't be melted. Baligaju was still standing in the bamboo house. His pair of eyes were floating as if they were brewing ice. He casually placed his free hand on the stone wall. It was clearly a languid posture, but when he did it, it interpreted extreme danger. When Nangong Lai came in, he saw this scene. He shook his head with an evil aura. Chi. This is the first time that a woman was not tempted by you? It seems that our little kitten still doesn't have much yearning for his highness. Baligaju's slender index finger brushed past the thumb ring on his hand. He glanced at Nangong Lai. His elegance revealed a kind of alienation. It was difficult to approach him, and it made people fascinated. Seeing that he didn't have any reaction, Nangong Lai simply continued to speak. No wonder people say that the eldest daughter of the Hellion family is dead set on that heir of the Murong family. I feel that maybe it's really like this. Otherwise she wouldn't. He hadn't finished speaking when he was frightened by Baligaju's expression. That pair of bewitching cold eyes coldly stared at him. Step by step he walked closer. That appearance was like a poisonous snake, not allowing people to say another word. Accompanied by a snap sound, Baligaju's young and strong figure slowly walked out of the bamboo house. He thoroughly became a creature of the night. Nangong Lai stared blankly in place. He looked at the shattered thumb ring on the ground. His mouth was wide open and he didn't move at all. He was just angry. Chapter 34. In the darkness, Baligaju slowly walked. His entire person looked calm, yet emitted an extremely dangerous aura. A rustling sound came from the jungle as if something was following him. Baligaju's footsteps paused, his voice cold. Come out. Little bald head stiffened. With a tiger face and a meat bun in his mouth, his shoulders drooped as he revealed his human form. His small face carried a unique arrogance. Brother. Bailey Jiaju faintly hummed in agreement. It turned out that this little bald head was none other than Baligaju's 7th prince from the same mother and father, Bailey Kongchen. The little one scratched his own ear, incomparably adorable. Brother, why didn't you go to the superior compound? Imperial grandfather has always been asking me. Your superior compound woke up too early. Baligaju lazily lifted his eyelids. Without moving his expression, he swept his gaze over his exposed lotus root-like arms. His eyebrows slightly raised. What did you do wrong? Little Kongchen lowered his head to look at those little gravity buckles and hid behind him. I beat up the martial uncles of the superior compound. That group of old men gathered together and only knew how to gossip all day long. They actually said that brother wasn't qualified to major in martial chi. They don't know me. Baligaju pried open his small meaty fist. With a crack, those gravity buckles fell to the ground. Little bald head's face was full of vigor. Soon after, he pouted somewhat aggrievedly, but master said that using brute force to fight is wrong. As punishment, I can't eat meat for a week. Shadow. Then what are you holding in your hands? Don't think that you can lie just because you're the 7th prince. Shadow. After Baligaju heard this, his expression didn't change at all. He put those gravity buckles on his wrist and said neither quickly nor slowly, go get some beef jerky. Yes. Shadow's figure flashed and in a short while he came back with a paper bag. Little Kong Chen took it. His tiger eyes lit up as he took 2 big bites. While chewing the beef in his mouth, he didn't forget to tip him off. Brother, you'd better hurry up and transfer to the superior compound. There are a few ministers' sons over there who don't know your identity. They've always wanted to find trouble with you. They even found me here and encouraged me to fight with you. Humph humph, they're simply too stupid. Let's go back after we finish eating. Baligaju's tone was very calm. Little Kong Chen lowered his eyes in disappointment. After a while he raised his head again. Brother, I followed Master into the palace yesterday. Baligaju brushed the non-existent dust off his body and waited for him to continue. Little Kong Chen asked seriously, are you really going to choose an imperial concubine? Baligaju's fingers paused. But Imperial Grandfather said that this martial chi test is to prepare for you to choose an imperial concubine. Imperial Father has agreed to it. Little Kong Chen's cheeks bulged as he ate. His big eyes were full of light. Brother, you must choose a good cook or else you'll starve. Shadow. Hee 7th Prince, do you think that everyone is like you, a foodie? Baligaju took off his outer robe and put it on the little one. Then he said, I know, let's go back. Brother, they all said that you sold yourself to a woman. That woman didn't like you, but that Lord Murong. Is this true? Shadow suddenly shivered. 7th Prince, 7th Prince, why didn't you ask about other things? Why did you have to ask this question? Baligaju paused. He reached out and put his hand into his pocket. When he lowered his head, he could see his firm and powerful skin. It was perfect and eye-catching. Hellion Wei Wei. He chuckled softly as he read out these 4 words. The tip of his tongue lightly licked his thin lips as a bloodthirsty smile blossomed at the corners of his mouth. The north wind whistled past, rolling up his fluttering cloak, revealing that handsome face that could make people gasp at any time, indifferent and cold to the point that people couldn't even feel the slightest bit of warmth. The next day, a gentle breeze blew. The sky was clear and the air was refreshing. If one were to say what was the most interesting part of the entrance exam, it would be none other than the martial arts competition. It was said that the martial arts competition this time was personally overseen by Grandmaster Zizun. The superior compound's genius Murong Chongfeng was the referee. The top 3 martial artists would have the qualifications to be transferred to the superior compound from the other compounds. Those who failed would be eliminated. Therefore, the people of the good and good compounds all gathered their energy for the sake of being able to enter the world's most powerful superior compound. You guys look, those 2 people from the inferior compound really came. Everyone didn't restrain themselves at all as they covered their faces and laughed. Hellion Mei coldly humphed. Forget about that, young master. I really don't understand why that good-for-nothing would blindly join in on the fun. 3rd sister, how many times have I told you? That's the eldest sister after all. When Hellion Jiaoer was in front of people, she would always have a brotherly affection. Everyone only thought that she was kind-hearted and liked her even more. 2nd Miss, she's just a good-for-nothing. Why are you speaking up for her? We've all heard that she used to bully you quite a bit. That's right, 2nd sister. Look at that good-for-nothing's arrogant appearance. Maybe a miracle will happen. It can't be like last time where she can't even light up the crystal ball, right? Then she'll really make a fool of herself, huh? Hellion Mei laughed, the ridicule in her tone was very strong. Hellion Jiaoer pretended to glare at her. When she looked at Hellion Vivian, she had a pitiful appearance. Eldest sister will do her best. After all, you don't have the slightest bit of martial chi. Even if the result isn't ideal, you shouldn't randomly throw a tantrum. These words sounded like they were for Hellion Vivian's good, but in reality, every sentence was reminding everyone that this good-for-nothing had made a fool of herself in the past. Everyone present knew that last time during the martial chi test, Hellion Vivian was really unspeakably embarrassed. She used all her strength to touch the crystal ball. Even when she tried to inject chi, she was sweating profusely and swaying. She put in so much effort, but in the end that crystal ball only produced a little bit of gas, which was basically negligible. Even if that wasn't enough, she still insisted on being in the same group as Murong Chongfeng. When they stood on the competition stage, other people only raised their fists and were sent flying by her. In short, Hellion Vivian, this good-for-nothing was a joke. If this joke stopped here, the bystanders wouldn't say anything. However, this joke didn't even have the least bit of self-awareness. She was always swaying in front of them. This time, in order to attract Murong Chongfeng's attention, she recklessly came to compete in martial qi. She was really tired of living not wanting to give face. This time's test, even if they used their toes to think, they would know the result. The last place would definitely be Hellion Vivian, that good-for-nothing. Hellion Vivian naturally knew what kind of gazes the surrounding people were using to look at her. That kind of mixed ridicule and disdain, she was all too familiar with it. However, she didn't care at all. She even lazily yawned. That smile brought out a languid and noble air, which was even more outstanding. Even though she was in such a huge hall, she was still able to capture everyone's gaze at the first instance. Chapter 35. Was it her misperception? That slut's face seemed to be a little wider? Hellion May was extremely unhappy that the good-for-nothing had stolen her limelight. A cold light flitted across her eyes. I don't know what kind of person that good-for-nothing received guidance from in the end. She actually looks a little different now. Sister, don't worry. Hellion Jiao Air looked left and right. Seeing that there was no one around, she patted Hellion Jiao Air's hand and softly said, Elder sister has already helped you arrange everything. You and that good-for-nothing will be in the same group. Even if you don't do anything during the test, you can still make her lose face. She can't even ignite the crystal ball. Hellion May thought of that scene, the corners of her mouth hooked up, her eyes filled with poison. I announce that the martial qi test officially begins. Following this sentence, the white-haired old man and Murong Chongfeng stood up from their wooden chairs at the same time, their sacred white robes fluttering. The wind from all directions also seemed to be still, filled with a mysterious smell, making people unconsciously restrain their mind. A cylindrical transparent object slowly rose from the center of the main hall. Its whole body was silver, emitting a faint light. And on top of it, a crystal ball of about the same size was closely glued to it, clean and transparent beyond imagination. Everyone went up the stage one by one as if they were in the modern world. As long as they placed their hands on the crystal ball, they activated the true power in their body and poured it into the crystal ball. The special material of the crystal ball would reflect the corresponding attribute. If it was gold, the crystal ball would become a bright yellow. If it was fire attribute, the crystal ball would become a fiery red fireball. The level of the attribute would depend on the degree of light the crystal ball emitted. The brighter it was, the higher the martial qi, and the dimmer it was, the lower the martial qi. Hellion Vivian looked at the crystal ball that was sometimes bright and sometimes dark. The reflected light filled the surroundings. There was only one thought in her mind: wait until the day she left White Academy, she must take this crystal ball with her. Such a good quality crystal ball with perfect corners was not commonly seen. Beligaju, who was sitting not far away, glanced in her direction. His deep eyes seemed to be able to see through everyone. Hellion Vivian didn't care that he had seen through her thoughts. The corners of her mouth curled up and her eyes sparkled. Bailey Jiaju took note of her actions and raised his eyebrows. He didn't say anything and only leisurely turned the teacup in his hand. Between his thin lips, there was a hint of playfulness. Next group, divisions: Hellion May versus Hellion Vivian. Murong Chongfeng's clear and cold voice sounded. It was neither flat nor light, as if he was carrying out some kind of sacred matter. Only it was clear that this time his voice carried a faint disdain. Hellion Wei Wei stood up from her seat and leisurely tidied up her left sleeve. Her expression was indifferent as she lazily stretched her waist. Everyone's gazes were once again cast over. They looked at this woman who possessed the Hellion clan's only bloodline, but didn't have any martial qi. Their eyes were full of ridicule. Hellion May faced all around and smiled. Her face carried an unconcealable complacency. When she walked in front of Hellion Vivian, she coldly smiled. Slut, you haven't become stupid from looking at Lord Murong again, right? I advise you to stop daydreaming. Do you know who the great master standing on top is? Hellion Vivian glanced at the old man standing next to the crystal ball. It was very clear that Hellion May wasn't very interested in this topic. Hellion May couldn't stand this kind of attitude of hers. With a condescending arrogance, she said, "That is Dragon War Empire's most powerful great master. He has a strength that you can't reach even if you spend your whole life. However, this kind of person is different to Second Sister. You still want to vainly compare yourself to Second Sister, simply laughable." Hellion Vivian's fingers paused for a moment. This small movement naturally didn't escape Hellion May's eyes. She raised her chin and her voice carried a sense of complacency. Ha, now you know to be afraid. It is said that this great master's identity is hidden very deeply, and he doesn't easily reveal himself. This time he definitely appeared for second sister. Don't use this kind of expression to look at me. Presumably you haven't even seen this great master before. Hellion Vivian didn't speak. She only raised her eyes to look at the old man who was looking at her. The corners of her mouth slightly hooked up. How should she tell Hellion May that the great master she spoke of that she hadn't even seen before was actually her master? Hellion May saw that Hellion Vivian lowered her head, and the complacency in her heart became even stronger. This woman still had times when she was afraid. That couldn't be better. However, she didn't see the smile on Hellion Vivian's face when she lowered her head. The curve of her lips slowly widened. There was ridicule, indifference, depth, and nonchalance. The only thing that wasn't there was fear. At this time, the two people had already walked to the side of the crystal ball. Hellion May put away the ridicule on her face from before, and faced the two elders with a very innocent smile. She bowed very politely. Hello to the two elders. Compared to Hellion May, Hellion Vivian was clearly more indifferent. The Grand Master blew his beard and glared, and his expression was very aggrieved. He thought that his obedient disciple would be very happy to see him here, and would immediately throw herself into his arms, making those people jealous to death. But how could his disciple be so cold? Could it be that she didn't like him coming to see her test? Thinking about it, this disciple of his had always been very low-key. She had even warned him not to announce their relationship. Sigh. It wasn't easy to accept a disciple, but he couldn't acknowledge her. Cough. Hellion Vivian put her hand to her mouth, and did her best to ignore the Grandmaster's resentful gaze. Her voice was indifferent. Before the test, I want to speak a few words with the Grandmaster alone. It was very obvious that Murong Chongfeng didn't expect Hellion Vivian to make such a request. After a slight daze, his eyes were filled with disgust. Everyone curled their lips in disdain, because Hellion Vivian's current actions were undoubtedly fawning in their eyes. Their gazes towards her became more and more disdainful. They were just waiting for this good-for-nothing to make a fool of herself. One must know that the Grandmaster's temper was very strange. In his eyes, he didn't have the concept of loving the younger generation. What he despised the most was this kind of person who stuck close to him. Let's see how the Grandmaster will deal with her in a moment. Only Beligaju, who was sitting on the wooden chair, changed his posture. The finger supporting his chin tapped his chin and slightly raised his eyes. As if he sensed something, an unknown light flashed through his eyes. Murong Chongfeng seemed like he didn't want to say a single word to Hellion Vivian. He wrinkled his thick eyebrows and was just about to open his mouth. He heard the Grandmaster's deep voice. Fine. A single word blocked all of Murong Chongfeng's words. However, seeing that the Grandmaster's complexion was so ugly, he was definitely angered by that good-for-nothing. Murong Chongfeng rejoiced once again that he had broken off the engagement. Because this kind of woman who would rush forward to curry favor with anyone was really not worthy of him. Chapter 36. Hellion Vivian did not care about how the crowd looked at her. She turned around and lowered her voice. She whispered into the old man's ear, "No matter what happens later, Master, pretend that you don't know me. Disciple, are you really not going to give me a proper name?" Master's heart is already cold. The more the old man spoke, the more resentful his expression became. Hellion Vivian saw Hellion May leaning over and hurriedly ended the topic. "Remember what I said?" Hellion May coldly snorted and used a voice that only the two of them could hear to say, "Don't think that just because the Great Master gave you time, you have the opportunity to curry favor with him. The Great Master won't fall for your tricks. Just wait and see. In a moment the Great Master will open his mouth and ask you to get lost from this martial chi test. Where do you think this is? A good-for-nothing dares to come here? Who is the good-for-nothing we will know after we compete." Facing Hellion May's provocation, Hellion Vivian raised her eyes. Her cold and arrogant aura became very overwhelming as she raised her eyebrows. Hellion May looked at the figure that walked past her. That kind of indifferent attitude was as if she did not put her in her eyes at all. Despicable. Hellion May gritted her teeth. She could not wait to tear Hellion Vivian into pieces on the spot. She raised her head. The corner of her eyes carried a trace of a smile. "Let me test first. I'm afraid that big sister still needs to prepare." I think she has already forgotten how to use her chi. I can also give big sister a demonstration. Hellion May's tone was a little high. Even if she wanted to cover it up, she could not suppress the strong sense of ridicule. Her purpose was very clear. She wanted to test her own martial chi first and then let Hellion Vivian test it. With a comparison, she could show the incompetence of this good-for-nothing Hellion Vivian. As smart as Hellion Vivian was, how could she not know what the other party was thinking? She curved her thin lips and didn't waste her time on who would test first. To her it didn't matter who tested first. Hellion May faced Wei Wei's direction and glanced complacently. After that she took a step forward and jumped onto the stone platform. Everyone's state of mind shook and all of them placed their gazes on her body. Although this Hellion May wasn't a genius like Hellion Jiaoer, she was still an extremely powerful martial artist. She had just entered the academy, and she had already obtained first place among the good students. It could be said that she was the best choice to enter the superior compound in this time's martial chi test. As if enjoying the feeling of being the center of attention, Hellion May raised her chin and placed her hand on the transparent crystal ball. In an instant, a deep sea fog rose from the bottom of the crystal ball, emitting a bright light. In that instant the crowd surged up. It's water rank level 5. Heavens! It was actually water rank. It's very difficult for an average new student to reach this height. Worthy of being the Hellion family's young miss. Hellion May looked at the effect she created with satisfaction. With a complacent expression, she withdrew her hand from the crystal ball, and her face couldn't hide the smile on it. She turned her head and looked at Hellion Vivian. Although her face was smiling, the words that came out of her mouth carried a tone that made people uncomfortable. Big sister, come and try to. If you don't want to try, you can give up on the test. After all, in front of this many people, losing face is very difficult to get back. As soon as he heard this, Grandmaster Zizun immediately became angry. His eyes were wide open and he secretly said in his heart, "Humph, a little water rank is so arrogant. It's fine if you're immensely proud of yourself, but you still have to come and trample on my good disciple. How can you be like this? This matter can't be tolerated." Grandmaster Zizun was just about to do something when he saw his own disciple cast a warning look at him. Helpless, he could only obediently sit back down again, extremely unhappy. As if he sensed the change in the old man's mood, Beligaju, who was hidden below the stage, glanced at him, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more intense. Sure enough, the little thing recognized that old man. Grandmaster Zizun still didn't know that a certain highness that he was constantly thinking about was watching him from the crowd. The people below the stage could see clearly and the people on the stage could see clearly. Therefore at this time Grandmaster Zizun's mind was full of thoughts. With his own disciple's intelligence and wisdom, she would definitely surpass that girl who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Therefore Grandmaster Zizun proudly rolled up his sleeves, and with a solemn voice he called out, "Hellion Vivian, come up." As soon as people heard his angry tone, they looked at Hellion Vivian with even more understanding and ridicule. This good-for-nothing was indeed disliked by others. Just now she wanted to hug Grandmaster Zizun's thigh, but now even Grandmaster Zizun saw her face clearly. Hellion Vivian, on the other hand, had a relaxed smile. Stretching her body, she slowly walked towards the crystal ball. When she passed by her master, her footsteps didn't even stop for a moment. This made the Hellion Jiaoer, who was sitting at the side, curve her thin lips. This lowly woman was simply seeking her own death. Grandmaster Zizun already had an opinion of her, yet she was still so arrogant. She'll have a good time in a while. Hellion Vivian didn't care at all. She extended her white jade-like palm and placed it on the crystal ball. The Hellion Jiaoer held her tea and gracefully took a sip. Her eyes were full of ridicule. No matter how presentable she was still just a good-for-nothing. Just extending your hand isn't enough. You have to pour your chi into the crystal ball. Don't you understand these things? Murong Chongfeng's increasingly impatient words caused a wave of ridicule. It can't be. This good-for-nothing still doesn't know how to test her chi? You guys forgot. She's just here to make a fool of herself. We just need to watch. It's not good to have such high expectations for a good-for-nothing. The ridicule grew louder and louder like a tide, surging in all directions. It was especially ear-piercing. Hellion Vivian didn't even move an inch. She still had a lazy appearance. Beligaju playfully raised his eyebrows. If a normal girl was ridiculed like this, she would have already come down from the testing platform. At the very least she would feel embarrassed. Looking at her again, her face was calm and indifferent. Seemed like she was laughing but also seemed like she was ridiculing. What was she ridiculing? Beligaju wanted to take a closer look, but saw her 5 fingers tremble. Her chi slightly surged towards the center of her palm. The crystal ball made a whoosh sound and fog rose from all directions. An unknown wind rushed in from all directions. It whistled past, making a buzzing sound. The surrounding air was actually affected. The old man subconsciously looked towards the direction of Hellion Vivian. A trace of disbelief suddenly flashed through his heart. No, it shouldn't be possible. His disciple actually, the north wind whistled past. The people standing below the platform only felt their cheeks hurt. It took a lot of effort for them to clearly see the changes in the crystal ball. Hellion Vivian gently smiled. Her black hair fluttered in the wind. She was indescribably handsome. Chapter 37. If people looked carefully, they would discover that the wind was completely under her control. However, other than Supreme Martial Artist who had reached an unbounded level, no one would notice this kind of subtle difference. No, there might be one more person. Only, that person's expression wasn't as obvious as Grandmaster Supreme's. Instead, his deep eyes narrowed, bewitchingly cold and wanton. As for the others, they all cared about what kind of light the crystal ball would emit and how dazzling it would be. However, nothing in the crystal ball lit up. Instead, a layer of white fog surged. Woman, you can actually control the wind. Wind is the most difficult attribute to control. Hearing Yuan Ming's pleasantly surprised cry, Hellion Vivian finally retracted her hand. That crystal ball was already as clean as before without the slightest bit of impurity. Hellion Mei stood at the side, covering her mouth as she lightly laughed. I thought that a miracle would happen with the sound just now. In the end, it didn't even light up. Hellion Jiaoer seemed to be waiting for this result. She looked at Hellion Mei as if complaining, "Third sister, you're talking nonsense again. Eldest sister has already tried her best, you don't need to say anything more." Second sister is right. Making eldest sister light up the crystal ball is simply making things difficult for her. The two sisters, one playing the good cop and the other playing the bad cop, thoroughly ridiculing Hellion Vivian. The new students below the stage also laughed, their voices so loud that almost the entire courtyard could hear them. Beligaju's peach blossom eyes faintly raised, his lips forming a stunning arc. It's only a test ball, yet it actually made these people believe it without a doubt. The contempt on his lips was very deep, as if he was mocking, yet also as if he was pondering. Seeing the arc on the side of his master's face, an E couldn't help but shiver. He didn't know who was going to be unlucky again, and it was going to be extremely unlucky. Sitting on the stage, the more Grandmaster listened, the uglier his expression became. He saw through the two sisters' tricks, and anger couldn't help but rise in his heart. Bullying his good disciple so brazenly, did they treat him as a dead person? His good disciple was so good. She was smart, knew how to earn money, and even knew how to make armaments to make him happy. She didn't care if he taught her anything and just took care of him like an old man. Isn't it just that the crystal ball didn't light up? What's the big deal? Moreover, this group of people simply did not understand how amazing his disciple's talent was. The supreme martial artist was so angry that his eyes widened. Even his white beard stood up. Just as he was about to take a step forward, he saw Wei Wei raise her hand and wave her sleeves. Her white clothes were like invulnerable satin. Next to the crystal ball, they bloomed enchantingly. Her thin lips very slowly curved up. After the test is over, let's start the competition while the wind still hasn't stopped. Martial arts competition? What did I just hear? This piece of trash wants to compete with me? Hellion Mei dug her ears and laughed mockingly. I advise big sister to go down early, so that I won't beat you until you kneel and beg for mercy. After Hellion Vivian heard her words, she didn't get angry. Instead, she strolled over. Her body slightly leaned forward, and the corner of her mouth curved up into an evil arc. Then let's try. Let's see who will kneel and beg for mercy in the end. Hellion Vivian's voice was originally relatively clear. Resounding in the courtyard that was full of mocking laughter, there was actually a kind of breathtaking feeling that broke out of its shell. Since big sister is so impatient, then as a younger sister, I can only fulfill your wish. Fulfill your wish of going to hell. Hellion May narrowed her eyes, and her whole body emitted layers of watery mist. Seeing this scene, even more people didn't believe that Hellion Vivian would win. Because everyone knew that this was a competition without any suspense. Even if Hellion Vivian had martial chi with her current ability, it was impossible for her to defeat a water class expert. Moreover, she didn't even have the ability to light up the crystal ball. How could she dare to overestimate herself and propose a martial arts competition? The atmosphere in the courtyard was getting thicker and thicker. They were all waiting to see how that trash would be crippled. Hellion May was even more ruthless. She directly took out an extremely lethal long whip. When the tail of the whip swept across the ground, it made a sound that made everyone feel pain. "I'll give you a whip and directly end you." After saying that, Hellion May's wrist turned. The long whip soared as if it could tear apart the wind, and with a whistling sound, it whipped towards Hellion Vivian. That kind of fast speed no one could evade. Everyone thought in their hearts if this whip fell, Hellion Wei's face would definitely be ruined. However, what they didn't expect was that Hellion Vivian actually supported herself with one hand and beautifully flipped upside down. Using the rotation of her legs, she wrapped around the long whip. Hellion May's expression changed. She coldly snorted and quickly retracted the long whip. "You have a lot of tricks. However, the game ends here. Go to hell." Pop. The long whip swung towards the sky. A violent wind blew and true power surged. Countless amounts of water vapor wreaked havoc in the air. However, the target was only one person. Hellion Vivian. Seeing this scene, not only did Grandmaster wrinkle his eyebrows, even the Dean Tusifong, who was watching from afar, shook his head in disapproval. Generally speaking, when facing a competitor with a great disparity in strength, one wouldn't kill them all. However, right now Hellion May actually used her greatest killing move to deal with Hellion Vivian. This time Hellion Vivian wouldn't just simply lose the competition. She would very likely lose her life. Hellion May complacently looked at the helpless Hellion Vivian who was tied up by the water vapor. She just knew that this trash wouldn't have the slightest bit of resistance under her hands. Right now, as long as she used a little bit of strength, she would immediately die. Wait a minute. That slut is laughing. At this kind of time she's actually laughing. The wind has finally started. Hellion Vivian was indeed laughing. One of her hands was in her pocket while the other was in the air. Feeling the flow of the air, her thin lips slightly curved, looking both handsome and demonic. The wind has started? What wind has started? This trash shouldn't have been scared silly, right? The freshmen simply couldn't understand what Hellion Vivian was saying. Once again they roared with laughter. However, right at this moment, Hellion Vivian's figure suddenly stopped. Following that, like a phantom, she closed in, bringing along a strong wind that made people's breathing sluggish. Without waiting for Hellion May to react, an ice-cold feeling came from her neck. That cold and sharp edge made Hellion May's expression change in a flash. How could this be? She clearly didn't feel any martial chi from the opponent's body. How in the world did this trash break through her defense? Her black pupils slowly widened because she didn't dare to believe it. Hellion May looked at Hellion Vivian, who was pinching her throat, her face extremely pale. The first time she was beaten by this trash, it was completely because she didn't expect her to dare to counterattack. In addition, at that time she had to maintain her image, so she didn't even use martial chi. But this time it was really because it was too fast. Everything was too fast, so fast that even her forelimbs seemed to have become stiff. Chapter 38. Hellion Jiaoer, who was sitting at the side, realized that something was wrong. She shouted at Hellion May, "Sister, what are you doing? Hurry up and move." Hellion May still maintained her previous posture. She couldn't even lift her hand. She wanted to move, but the pressure coming from all directions made her only able to stand there. This wind, it seemed to be pressing down on her body. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and grabbed her collar. Her eyes were cold, her features were like frost, and her clothes fluttered in the wind. It was hard to conceal her frivolity. "I, Hellion Vivian, have never been a love-struck fool. The Hellion clan has never produced a good-for-nothing. And you have lost." Bang! Hellion May was thrown to her knees. Her black hair was messed up into grass at some point. She cut an extremely sorry figure. One move, only one move, and a 4th-level water rank expert was defeated by her hands. This was simply unheard of. However, this heart-wrenching reality had truly appeared in front of everyone's eyes. For a moment the entire audience was quiet. So quiet that only the slight sound of the wind could be heard. Except for Beligaju, almost everyone was so shocked that they couldn't close their mouths. Hellion Wei Wei stood on the stone platform, her clear and cold little face only had tranquility, without the slightest trace of complacency and arrogance after victory. The golden sunlight shone in from outside the courtyard. The wind from all four directions stirred up the white clothes draped over her body, and her black hair fluttered in the wind. No one dared to call her trash again. This was the first time Hellion Vivian mentioned the Hellion clan in front of everyone. She was using this kind of method to tell the world that she was still here. The Hellion clan was still here. But no one expected that in the near future Hellion Vivian would use an even more stunning method to tell them that not only was the Hellion clan still here, it could even make a comeback. Murong Chongfeng, who was closest to her, had a face of disdain, disgust and finally shock. Every time his expression changed, his eyes never left Hellion Vivian for a moment. In that split second, it was as if his heart had been struck by something. As the referee, Murong Chongfeng was somewhat absent-minded. When Beligaju saw this, his hand that was holding the white jade teacup froze for a moment. The surrounding trees rustled. "Bitch, you tricked me." Hellion May placed her palms on the ground and glared at Hellion Vivian with reddened eyes. Her face was filled with unwillingness. She really lost? Losing was not scary. The most frightening thing was that she still didn't know what had happened. That bitch must have used some underhanded means. Cheating? Hellion Vivian sneered. She bent down and picked up the leaf by her feet. She fiddled with it for a while before throwing it away. A streak of blood immediately appeared on Hellion May's cheek. She looked at him and her eyes shook violently. Hellion Vivian chuckled and patted his face. Her eyes emitted a vicious aura, making everyone present shocked. "Remember, it's not that I don't have the ability to kill you, but that I find your blood dirty." Hearing this, Tusu Feng's lips curled up in amusement. He remembered that there was once a person who only used one move to become famous in a single battle. And that person wasn't even a water-ranked martial artist, but White Academy's great protector. That year that person was only 9 years old. When he saw him he would still call him uncle. Although his tone was very cold, it could still be considered cute. Only he didn't know what kind of waves he would set off this time when he came to White Academy. Thinking like this, Tusu Feng slightly tilted his head and looked meaningfully at that cold and peerless figure in the crowd below the stage. Beligaju didn't even lift his eyes. He lowered his eyes and fiddled with his fur cloak. The corner of Tusu Feng's mouth twitched. In his eyes, all the people and things in the world couldn't compare to that outer garment of his. Only 10 years had passed and a small ice cube had become a large ice mountain. It was really boring. Actually, that good-for-nothing Miss Hellion didn't seem to be as simple as she looked. Lying on the ground, Hellion May looked at Hellion Vivian, who was surrounded by stars. Her entire face started to distort. She was only lucky. What was this slut so proud of? The surging malice in her heart infected her pair of beautiful eyes. Hellion May lowered her eyes and turned her left hand over. She wanted to take advantage of the time when everyone's attention was focused on Hellion Vivian and use the poisonous wasp to backstab her. That poisonous wasp was a poison unique to the Western region. No matter who it was, they wouldn't be able to detect its existence. People who were bitten by the poisonous wasp wouldn't have any abnormalities or life-threatening dangers. However, the poisonous wasp's venom could consume a bit of the cultivator's martial chi. Such a precious poison shouldn't have been wasted on this good-for-nothing. She wanted to save it for the next match. Since this slut didn't open her eyes, she would let her taste what it meant to be in so much pain that she wished she was dead. However, she still lacked a cover. Thinking of this, Hellion May glanced at the Hellion Jiaoer. The Hellion Jiaoer immediately understood her meaning and slightly leaned her body to block the other's line of sight. Hellion May waved her long sleeve and that poisonous wasp flew out. It was originally a foolproof plan. However, she didn't expect that at this moment Hellion Vivian would suddenly look back. Behind her there seemed to be an extra shadow. That shadow's appearance couldn't be seen, but it had a head full of silver hair that made people terrified. Something unexpected happened. That poisonous wasp actually forcibly changed its direction and flew towards her. Hellion May wasn't prepared and in a moment, the poisonous wasp bit her neck. "Oh no. Don't come over." She couldn't help but scream. Looking at Hellion Vivian, her eyes were filled with fear. When the Hellion Jiaoer heard the sound, she hurriedly ran over. Looking at Hellion May's bloody neck, she was suddenly stunned. Following that, her beautiful eyes filled with pitiful tears. Eldest sister. What did you do? Third sister, only help me say a few words. Even if you resent me, even if you like the air, you can't vent your anger on third sister like this. At this time, people discovered that Hellion May's neck was rotten to the point that it was about to become unbearable. There was a shiny poisonous wasp lying there. That poisonous wasp originally didn't have any color. Right now it seemed to have absorbed enough martial qi. Its shiny belly moved, making people who saw it feel cold in their hearts. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. It was very clear that they all knew the danger of this poisonous wasp. This thing was very evil. It relied on absorbing martial qi to survive. Although every time it absorbed a person's martial qi, there would be a long period of time where it wouldn't cause trouble. However, once it came into contact with someone, it would certainly absorb all of the martial qi on the martial artist's body. No matter who it was, no one would be able to stop it. Unless the martial artist died, then it would leave the martial artist's skin. This Hellion family's eldest daughter was indeed a vicious and merciless debauchee. Just for a man, she actually used such a sinister method to frame her own biological sister. More and more disgusted gazes shot towards Hellion Vivian one after another, as if the young girl standing in front of them wasn't a human at all, but an evil spirit. Chapter 39. Hellion Wei Wei merely smiled lightly, her pair of eyes slowly dyed with a mocking light. Yuan Ming snorted, "These two sisters of yours, they didn't release the poisonous beast to harm you, so they turned around and bit back. I can be considered to have seen their shameless ability. These stupid humans actually believed them, they are idiots." Hellion Jiaoer naturally couldn't hear Yuan Ming's words. She reached out to support the heavily injured Hellion Mei, crying heartbreakingly, "Eldest sister in the defense department, third sister, and I have always let you have your way. When you bullied me, I also never said anything. Who told you to have the blood of the Hellion clan flowing in your body? But this matter, we can't just let it go like this, there are still laws in this world." Hellion Vivian crossed her arms and coldly looked at her, the corners of her mouth slightly curved. "It seems that second sister and I have the same thoughts. This matter really can't just let it go like this." Today, if it was the Hellion Vivian of the past encountering this kind of situation, they were bound to frame her like this. People's words were terrible, and the Hellion Jiaoer used this point to frame Hellion Vivian again and again. Hellion Vivian never knew how to reason with them. But she was no longer the Hellion Vivian of the past who could be fooled by them. Hellion Jiaoer, this green tea bitch, wanted to scheme against her, her methods were still too inexperienced. She didn't know why, but looking at Hellion Vivian's unmoved side profile, Hellion Jiaoer faintly felt a chill in her heart. However, things had already reached this point. She didn't believe that this good-for-nothing still had a chance to turn things around. What could she use to gamble with so many people's mouths? Hellion Jiaoer sneered in her heart, but her face was still like a pear blossom in rain. "I know you don't like me. No matter how many times I explain, eldest sister will always find trouble with me because of Lord Murong. I can bear it, but third sister is still young. Eldest sister, how can you bear it?" The more she spoke, the sadder she became. When she got to the emotional part, her tears fell like a broken string of pearls. She really put on a good show. When the surrounding men saw this, they couldn't help but want to stand up for her. "I've long heard that a certain young lady is a hedonistic and unreasonable person. Now that I've seen her today, I'm convinced. This kind of girl, even if she was given to me for free, I wouldn't want her. No wonder Lord Murong couldn't help but divorce her." "Don't say that. She's done so much for Murong Rong. That depends on whether Lord Murong is willing to let her do that." Hearing what was said, Murong Chongfeng's body slightly stagnated for a moment. His cold face turned towards Hellion Vivian. "How many times have I told you, you should stop your barbarism, yet you refuse to listen. This time I definitely won't let you off lightly." When he heard her last time, he thought that this woman had already given up on him. Looking at it now, it was indeed just a trick to play hard to get. Only, he never thought that she would become more and more ruthless for him. Hellion Mei, who was originally bitten by the poisonous bees, heard Murong Chongfeng's words. Her eyes flashed with a trace of light. Fortunately, second sister's reaction was fast enough. She wouldn't suffer this injury for nothing. Anyway, the poisonous bees were raised by her. When there was no one around, she could take back her martial chi. The most important thing was that slut's road had finally come to an end. Even if she won, so what? She would still be ridiculed by the world. A good-for-nothing young lady who lost her power also dared to fight with them. She was simply acting recklessly. Yes, we definitely can't let her off lightly. This kind of person doesn't deserve to stay at White Academy. Drive her out. Drive her out. At this time, everyone also echoed one after another. All of them were targeting Hellion Vivian. The corners of Wei Wei's mouth pulled up into a seemingly evil smile. Each and every one of them hated that they couldn't eat her up. It seemed that her charisma was really not small, to be able to make them so united as one. The old man watching from the side was really anxious. He wanted to help but found that he didn't know where to start. He didn't believe that his own disciple would use some poisonous bee to bite people. That girl's temperament had always been mild. She wouldn't do such a shameless thing. But the existence of that poisonous bee was enough to make his obedient disciple speechless. He was really afraid that these people would indiscriminately drive people away. But was that really the case? Would Hellion Vivian be speechless? Not at all. The reason why she didn't speak was because she was thinking. Of course, she wouldn't waste her breath to explain. Because Yuan Ming's existence couldn't be told to anyone. And no matter who it was, they wouldn't believe that Hellion Mei would use a poisonous bee to bite herself. So, rather than wasting time to explain, it was better to directly throw out the evidence for them to see. She believed that the evidence was on Hellion Mei's own body. And Hellion Jiaoer still didn't know anything. She extended her hand to block Murong Chongfeng. Lord, please give me face and forgive eldest sister this time. As long as she is willing to kneel down to pour tea and apologize to third sister, this matter will be over. After all, we are sisters. I can't bear to see her being driven out like this. After speaking, Hellion Jiaoer lowered her eyes. Her long eyelashes covered her full satisfaction. She didn't forget that a few days ago that slut almost made her kneel. Today she wanted to make her pay back all of it. Miss Jiaoer, you're just too kind. This evil girl isn't worthy of your pity. This time, don't say that Lord won't forgive her, even we won't stand by and watch. Everyone's face was full of anger. The dean is also here. We will jointly submit a petition to expel her from the hospital. Facing this kind of aggressiveness, anyone would lack confidence and be somewhat flustered. However, Wei Wei merely smiled as she absent-mindedly played with the leaf in her hand. Does it mean that whoever released the poisonous bees have to be kicked out of the academy? In the distance, Beligaju was planning to appear. When he heard her words, he slightly raised his eyes. His deep eyes overflowed with a thoughtful demonic chill. At this time, Tu Feng and the others also rushed over. Beside them was a little bald head holding a meat bun. Who released this? Tu Feng looked at the poisonous bee that was full of qi and slightly frowned. A pair of eyes that could see through everything swept over everyone one by one, carrying a suffocating anger. He didn't think that in White Academy, there would be someone who dared to use this kind of poison. Hellion Mei also cried, Dean, you must uphold justice for me. I only said a few words to eldest sister, telling her not to run around Lord Murong, and she released this poisonous bee to bite me. Tu Feng calmly listened and suddenly stared at Hellion Mei. Is it really like this? Hellion Mei felt a burst of guilty conscience from his stare, but she still insisted, yes. We just watched from the side. Indeed, it was this new student from the inferior compound who played tricks. Even if she won, this kind of conduct is unacceptable and must be severely punished. The teachers were also on the side. The older students chimed in, their voices also contained a bit of indignation. Hellion Jiaoer followed and held onto Hellion Mei's shoulder. Her tone carried a crying voice. Eldest sister only made a mistake in a moment of impulse. Third sister and I don't want to do anything, we only want to protect ourselves. This sentence sounded like she was pleading for Hellion Vivian, but in reality she blocked all of Hellion Vivian's escape routes. It made it difficult for Tu Feng to help Hellion Vivian even if he wanted to. Chapter 40. If it was a normal person who encountered this situation, they would have already panicked. However, Hellion Vivian was calm and composed as she lightly smiled. She was neither arrogant nor impatient. This allowed the old man who was worried about her to calm down. He believed that his disciple was definitely not a vile person. There must be a reason why that poisonous wasp appeared. What was laughable was that those teachers who were also his teachers actually slandered his disciple just because she was from the inferior compound. As if she could feel the old man's anger, Hellion Vivian curved her lips into a smile. It seems that her family's teacher still trusts her. No matter what, she couldn't disappoint this old man, right? Everyone is saying that this poisonous wasp was released. Why don't you say who raised this poisonous wasp? Hellion Vivian, who hadn't opened her mouth until now, suddenly spoke. Her voice was so cold that it was hard for people to ignore it. Beligaju, who was hiding in the shadows, evilly raised his eyebrows. He looked at Hellion Vivian with a playful gaze. Everyone didn't understand. It was fine if she didn't try to absolve herself, but why did she say such nonsense? As for the main culprit, in the instant that Hellion Vivian said those words, her body completely froze. Impossible. That slut couldn't possibly know that method. Since everyone can't think of who it is, then let me tell everyone. Hellion Vivian's figure suddenly moved. The leaf in her hand danced in the wind, like a small knife cutting through Hellion May's sleeve. Only the sound of cloth rustling could be heard. An embroidered flower made of jade fell to the ground with a thud. That embroidered flower was very small. If it wasn't for its special color, it would have been very hard to notice. Hellion May's face completely paled. She wanted to stand up and continue to make a scene to divert everyone's attention. However, how could Hellion Vivian allow that? She was the first to pick up the embroidered flower and played with it slowly. Her tone was neither fast nor slow. I think all the experienced and knowledgeable teachers should know what this is. Blood jade is a necessity for raising poisonous bees. Because of it, the poisonous bees will be able to settle down and not target people. Third sister, your poisonous bees have bitten you, so why are you blaming me? Big sister. The Hellion Jiaoer saw the blood jade and knew that the situation was not good. She hurriedly tried to explain. Hellion Vivian interrupted her with a sneer. You too. Your relationship with third sister is so good that there is no distinction between you and me. You already knew that this poisonous wasp was raised by her, yet you still forced me to do so, wanting the dean to kick me out. I'd like to ask the two of you. You keep saying that I'm bullying you, but why are you working together to kill me? As soon as she finished speaking, the truth was revealed. Immediately there was some commotion in the courtyard. Everyone's eyes all looked towards Hellion May and Hellion Jiaoer. No, I didn't raise it. Second sister, quickly tell them that I didn't raise that poisonous wasp, quickly say it. Hellion May's stiff body trembled uncontrollably again. She grabbed Hellion Jiaoer's hand and shook it, wanting her to speak. However, Hellion Jiaoer was unable to protect herself now, so how could she defend Hellion May? Hellion Vivian's move made her become a poisonous woman in front of everyone. It shouldn't be like this, it shouldn't be like this. No. Hellion Jiaoer was just about to open her mouth when Tu Sufeng's cold eyes looked over. She still dared to quibble at this time. White Academy has never accepted students with low moral character. Hellion May and Hellion Jiaoer will be kicked off the mountain and will never be allowed to enter the academy. Such a cold voice caused everyone to be shocked. The usually gentle dean was obviously angry. This was White Academy's principal. No matter how illustrious the other's background was, he had the right to make them completely disappear from White Academy without informing those ministers. After hearing this, Hellion Jiaoer's entire body went limp. Her pair of eyes were filled with heart-wrenching tears. Never being allowed to enter the academy, it was better to just kill her directly. She raised her head and looked at Murong Chongfeng, using her eyes to implore him to save her. After all, only Murong Chongfeng could make Hellion Vivian, that slut, change her mind. As long as he gave that slut a little benefit, this matter might still be turned around. Murong Chongfeng also didn't want to let Hellion Jiaoer leave. After all, he had just introduced her to his master. In addition to her innate talent, her future was limitless. He couldn't just stand by and watch Hellion Jiaoer suffer like this. Chongfeng earnestly requests the principal to give the Hellion sisters a chance and let them stay. His Murong prince manner was different from other families. Even if they didn't carry the imperial family name, they were still part of the imperial family. Even if the principal wasn't afraid of anything, he still had to give him face. Seeing this, the teachers also followed one after another to plead for leniency. Yes, principal. The Hellion sisters are still young, please forgive them. Tu Sufeng's brows slightly wrinkled, somewhat absent-mindedly said, "The one who was framed is not this principal. Rather than pleading with me, you might as well plead with the victims." Everyone stared blankly. Only then did they look at Hellion Vivian, who had been cold and indifferent from beginning to end. Murong Changfeng thought for a moment before saying, "This time, everyone misunderstood you. As for that letter of annulment, it was only a moment of impulse on my part. Your marriage with me was permitted by retired emperor, it wouldn't be so simple to not count. This time, if you can forgive them, I can treat the previous matter as if it never happened. 1 month later I will marry you." His voice was very pleasant to hear, clear and cold with a hint of gloominess. Coupled with that luxurious appearance and deep eyes, it could almost make any young girl's heart beat. After all, these words were almost equivalent to admitting that Hellion Vivian was his future wife. The people standing here all knew that everything that Hellion Vivian did today was only to be able to obtain Murong Changfeng's attention. She liked him for 10 years. In these 10 years, time and time again, she racked her brains to think of ways to make him like her. Because of this, she suffered a lot and made a fool of herself. They all saw it. Only Murong Changfeng didn't even want to see her once, let alone marry her. He stubbornly delayed the marriage contract again and again. This was great. Lord Murong finally promised to marry her in a month's time. How could she continue to pursue this matter? She would definitely be unable to close her mouth from smiling. Sure enough, Hellion Vivian softly smiled as if she would agree to all of Murong Changfeng's requests. "If you want me to forgive them, it's also possible." Suddenly, Beligage's back that was leaning against the tree trunk slightly paused. The towering ancient tree shook and more than 10 leaves fell down. Murong Changfeng's lips curved into a smile. He just knew that she had done so much for him. Perhaps he could try to treat her a little better in the future. After all, he also didn't want to lose the gaze that was always watching him. A few days ago, because of her change, he was still somewhat irritated, although he didn't have any feelings for her. However, after that gaze that was filled with adoration and shyness disappeared, his whole person seemed to be somewhat wrong. Now that he thought about it, she was just forcing herself, saying that if she wanted him, he could take it away. She was simply lying to herself. This point was actually somewhat cute. Just like when they were young, that person pulled on his sleeve, aggrievedly practicing martial chi, white and tender little face filled with naughty cuteness. The more Murong Changfeng thought about it, the more likely it was. He couldn't help but laugh out loud, strolling towards Hellion Vivian. Beligage's back that was leaning against the tree trunk once again tightened. The curve of his mouth slowly became cold. Under his long sleeves, his fingers slightly stiffened as if he was silently enduring something. Chapter 41. As for Wei Wei's answer, it was actually within everyone's expectations. After all, someone like Murong Changfeng, who had a family background and an outstanding appearance, was hard to find in the entire capital. What's more, she'd always wanted to marry him. That's why people also didn't have anything to be surprised about, and wanted to reach out and pull Hellion Jiao Air up. However, at this time Hellion Vivian opened her mouth again. She stood in the middle of the courtyard without any makeup, her clothes fluttering. Her eyes looked straight at Murong Changfeng, pausing after each word. "But I want to break off the engagement." These few words were as light as the wind and clouds, but it was like a sudden clap of thunder that struck the crowd. Everyone was stunned and stopped their actions one after another. They looked at Hellion Vivian in disbelief, their eyes full of astonishment. Hellion Vivian still had an indifferent appearance. "Second sister has always emphasized that I resent her because of you. Since this is the case, Murong Changfeng does not need to be sneaky in the future. As long as Murong Changfeng agrees to break off the engagement, I will naturally help you." Murong Changfeng's lower jaw slightly tightened, his body also stiffened. His pair of eyes firmly stared at her, hiding the billowing waves of anger. This woman unexpectedly really wanted to. "Seeing that Murong Changfeng is not speaking, you should have agreed." Hellion Vivian met his eyes and laughed mockingly. If it was not for Murong Changfeng today, she would not have known that this engagement would be so troublesome. The engagement that retired emperor gave without special reasons could not be broken off. Since Murong Changfeng wanted to beg her for his little sister Jiao Air, then she must make him pay a price. A word of forgiveness in exchange for her freedom in the future. It was worth it. "You good, very good." Hellion Vivian, you are really good. Murong Chong Fong waved his long sleeves. The side of his face was as cold as a sculpture that had just walked out of the cold. Murong Chong Fong, when did he become the person who sent himself to the door but was rejected? Moreover, she actually wanted to push him to another woman. Anger was his first reaction. If it was not for so many people watching, he would really strangle her to death with his own hands. The person who liked him was obviously she not. Now she pushed him away. Did this woman really think that he wouldn't do anything to her? Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. She didn't think that Murong Chong Fong would have this kind of attitude. The one who didn't want to get married was obviously him. She didn't forget that if it weren't for his divorce letter, Hellion Jiaoer and Hellion Mei wouldn't have dared to beat her to death and throw her into the river. Although he was not the main culprit, he had never helped her even once. From the beginning to the end, he looked on coldly as a bystander and was extremely disgusted with her. Even if such a man was rare in this world, she would not want him. Nangong Lai, who had just finished the divination test, reached out and touched his chin. The corner of his mouth slightly curled up. The matter of breaking off the engagement was actually brought up by Hellion Vivian. There's a problem, there's definitely a problem. Beligaju was still leaning against the flowering tree. He brought the teacup to his lips and slowly tasted it. The swaying branches seemed to have quietened down a lot. Aju, don't tell me you're not the least bit curious as to why Hellion Vivian would do this? Nangong Lai thoughtfully tilted his head. According to my many years of experience, she must be playing hard to get. That's right, she's playing hard to get. I really couldn't tell that this little kitten liked Murong Chong Fong that much. For him, she didn't even care about her reputation. Nangong Lai immediately stopped speaking. It wasn't because of anything else, but because of the man's pair of eyes, floating and sinking as if brewing ice. He slightly leaned to the side as if he was listening to him speak. One hand was casually stuck in his pocket, the other hand was lightly pinching the white porcelain teacup. It was obviously a languid posture, but when he did it, it interpreted extreme danger. Nangong Lai lowered his head and lightly coughed. Beligaju glanced at him, his eyes fogged up. His fingers clasped the teacup, unable to see whether he was happy or angry. Noisy. Just these two words made Nangong Lai's face stiffen. Hey, come back here and tell me clearly who's noisy. This brother sees that you don't have any experience in relationships, so I'll analyze it for you. Let me say this first, you can't fight. I can fight with you using words. Beligaju didn't even pay attention to him anymore. Holding the teacup, he slightly used his strength. Nangong Lai touched the bridge of his nose. He wanted to follow, but he heard a bang. The big tree behind him seemed to have suffered a heavy blow. With a loud crash, it fell down, shaking up a thin layer of dust. When Nangong Lai saw this, he didn't dare to follow. With his back turned, he began to feel conflicted. In the end, who provoked a certain highness? And the people standing in the middle of the courtyard had already been shocked silly by Hellion Vivian's unexpected performance time and time again. Only Hellion Jiaoer, with a pair of watery eyes, fiercely glared at Hellion Vivian. Just as she was about to walk down with Hellion Mei's support, she heard Hellion Vivian gently smile and open her mouth. Little sisters, it seems that you've forgotten something. Hellion Vivian, I'm warning you. Don't go too far. Hellion Mei's usual temper had always been fiery. It was already not easy for her to endure until now. Now, any word from Hellion Vivian could light up her fire. Hellion Vivian looked at her and evilly pulled down her thin lips. Do you know why I only picked out your blood jade at the very end? I wanted to know to what extent you would frame me. I really didn't expect that little sister could still be so self-righteous after the matter has been investigated clearly. Who gave you this kind of capital? Was it father or these teachers who spoke up for you? Then I, Hellion Weiwei, will also say these words today. Although grandfather has passed away, the Hellion family has also changed hands and I'm all alone. Don't think that after framing me you can leave without saying sorry. Even if that person has the support of countless teachers behind them and countless powers to shield them, I will still get the justice that I deserve. Her clear voice resounded throughout the Nine Turns Academy, and didn't fade for a long time. Pa. It was like slapping everyone's face. Not only Hellion Mei and Hellion Jiaoer, but also those teachers who slandered her. As the cold wind blew, Hellion Weiwei raised her head, her ink-black hair wantonly. Her long sleeves fluttered in the wind. Seeing this scene, Grandmaster Zizun's eyes were slightly red. but he was smiling leisurely. This child was truly extremely clever. What a good retreat in order to advance. What a good get the justice that I deserve. After all these years, how many grievances had his dear disciple suffered? Tu Sufeng looked at Hellion Vivian standing in front of him. Even in the imperial palace he had never seen a girl like Hellion Vivian. She was as tough as her mother. But she had more tenacity and clarity than that person. Originally he still felt pity for the Hellion family. He thought that the things that the old man had won were going to be handed over to someone else. Now Tu Sufeng gently curved his thin lips. Perhaps this little girl would be the only variable in this. Chapter 42. What are you talking about? Wei, you're even scolding us old people with your words. A white figure walked over from afar. Hellion Vivian followed the sound and looked over. Her pupils abruptly shrunk, and the chilliness emitted from her body made Yuan Ming, who was hidden in the ancient book, shiver heavily. Who exactly was the person that came to be able to make this woman's mood fluctuate so much? Prime Minister Su. All the teachers walked over to him one after another. Grandfather. Hellion Jiaoer also called out, feeling wronged. She then turned her back and cried until she was covered in tears. Su Jiaqing looked at his normally most filial granddaughter being bullied to this extent, and a malicious intent immediately flashed through his eyes. Turning his head, he beamed at Hellion Vivian and said, "Your two younger sisters are still young, and are at the age to play around. They don't know the severity of the matter, so it's hard to avoid making mistakes. You're older than them. If you had said earlier that poison bee wasn't yours, how could us old people have misunderstood you? Principal, what do you say?" Tu Sufeng didn't say anything. On the contrary, Grandmaster Zizun's eyes widened, clearly somewhat angered. Hellion Vivian tightly clenched her trembling hands. He deserved to be called the current prime minister. What a powerful mouth. That year, if it wasn't for this mouth, her mother might have been able to endure it. In order to support his own daughter, this Su Jiaqing, who had a human face but a beast's heart, actually bribed the Zhang and Li families, making them insist in the main hall that her mother was vicious and jealous and couldn't tolerate anyone. Ever since that day, the entire capital treated her mother as the laughing stock after a meal. She still remembered that at that time her mother didn't even want to take a step out of the door. It wasn't easy for her spirit to get better, but this Su Jiaqing came over to make things difficult for them. Hellion Vivian's hands that were hidden under her long sleeves slowly loosened. She didn't know if it was because she was using the same body, but that grief and anger actually made her feel as if she had experienced it herself. However, no matter how deep her anger was, she had to endure it. This old fox in front of her wasn't easy to deal with. In the past, because she was angered like this, she couldn't control herself and did many foolish things. However, the current her was already different. How could she follow his script? Misunderstanding. Hellion Vivian said calmly, "Prime Minister Su, you've used the wrong words. It's not a misunderstanding. You've wronged me." Su Jiaqing's hand paused. This Hellion family's little vile spawn didn't know how to appreciate favors. He already gave her a way out, yet she was still so serious. She was simply asking for trouble. "Grandmaster, look at this girl's stubbornness. She's as stubborn as her mother. I've already admitted my mistake, but she still won't let it go. I don't know what to do. Grandmaster, you're the state preceptor of a country. Do you have a solution?" There were so many people, yet Su Jiaqing didn't ask and only asked Grandmaster Zizun. This was because he had already heard before he came here that that little vile spawn actually dared to curry favor with the Grandmaster during the examination. He was also an important official who assisted in the imperial court, so of course he knew the Grandmaster's temperament. Presumably, the Grandmaster already loathed her to the extreme, and would definitely speak to this side. Moreover, even though Grandmaster Zizun never cared about the affairs of the country, he still had a pivotal position in the imperial court. If he could speak, then no matter how clever and eloquent that little vile spawn was, she could only shut her mouth and suffer a loss. A good-for-nothing young lady who had lost her power should know her place and stay put. If she rushed to find trouble like this, then don't blame him for being ruthless. Hearing what was said, Tu Sufeng's always gentle thick eyebrows creased tighter and tighter. Grandmaster had always been unrestrained and did things according to his own preferences. Yet he didn't know that his next words could very possibly cause that little girl from the Hellion family to bear an injustice. In addition to his influence in the academy, If even he denied Hellion Vivian, then in the future Hellion Vivian would have to face the entire Academy's ostracism. Thinking up to here, Tusufeng was just about to open his mouth. An aged voice rang out. Within the gloomy voice was an unprecedented anger. It's fine if you don't admit it, but you're still insulting this old man's disciple. Not forgiving when you're in the right. Today we're not forgiving when we're in the right. Whoever doesn't accept this, you can come find this old man to ask for advice. Who is it? Who is speaking? The tone was very insolent. For a moment, everyone was somewhat unable to react. When they saw Grandmaster, who should have been sitting in the seat of honor, shake off his footsteps and walk in front of Hellion Vivian, his intention of protecting her was very obvious. Everyone was shocked. Looking at Hellion Vivian, their eyes were filled with disbelief and astonishment. Originally, this old man didn't want to open his mouth. Grandmaster's face carried a deep displeasure. He really wanted to do as his disciple said and help her keep this secret. Only what he didn't expect was that even though the evidence was already so obvious, these people could still be so thick-skinned and say that she's not forgiving when she's in the right. This made Grandmaster extremely displeased. Su Jiaqing, your Su family is simply going too far. Grandmaster's cold eyes swept around in a circle. No matter who it is, if they've done something wrong, then they must apologize. Not only do you not apologize, but you're also pressuring my disciple like this. I'd like to see with this old man here who dares to slander my disciple. After hearing these words, the teachers all heavily sucked in a breath of air. Even Su Jiaqing's legs were somewhat soft. How could it be like this? No matter who it was, they didn't expect Grandmaster to actually accept a disciple, and the one he accepted was even a trash from the Hellion family. It's over this time. Recalling the words they'd said before, every teacher's back was covered with a layer of cold sweat. They'd still naively thought that Grandmaster didn't find Hellion Vivian pleasing to the eye, and simply didn't think deeper. Looking at it again now, all of them had misunderstood, and even in front of Grandmaster, they'd said that his disciple wasn't anything. Hellion Jiaoer and Hellion Mei's complexions were the most unsightly. Hellion Mei's hands even started to tremble. Before, she'd still ridiculed her in front of that trash, saying that she definitely didn't know that Grandmaster, but now. No, this was absolutely not true. Not to mention these outsiders who didn't dare to believe it. Even Grandmaster Zizun, who was rather familiar with Grandmaster Tusufeng, also didn't expect this development. His eyebrows slightly raised. She's really your disciple? When did you accept her? Grandmaster originally wanted to properly talk about the matter of being stunned by his own disciple a few days ago, but once he saw Hellion Vivian's cold gaze turn towards him, the old man instantly changed his words. I just accepted her. Just accepted her? Tusufeng clearly didn't believe it and his eyebrows raised. Grandmaster straightened his chest. What? This old man just finds this little girl pleasing to the eye, so I want to accept her as my disciple. Is that not possible? Of course it's possible. Tusufeng's gentle and refined eyes seemed to be able to see through everything, yet he didn't expose it. That Hellion family's girl was actually able to suppress this old stubborn man. It was indeed interesting. Chapter 43. As for Su Jiaqing, he couldn't wait to find a hole in the ground and crawl into it. He had lived for such a long time and had always held a pivotal position in the Dragon War Empire. This was the first time he was blushing from someone's words. Although he didn't know what kind of luck that little vile spawn had to make Grandmaster Zizun fancy her. But right now he only hoped that everyone's attention would be focused on that little vile spawn, and not mention the matter just now. As it happened, Hellion Mei had long been spoiled. She rushed in front of Hellion Vivian and shouted herself hoarse. You did it on purpose. You deliberately made me and second sister look bad. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and smiled. From the beginning to the end, it was third sister and second sister who framed me. How did I deliberately make you look bad? Hellion Mei completely lost her reason from her smile. From the beginning to the end, you were just pretending. You, shut up. Su Jiaqing pulled Hellion Mei back with great strength, and directly pushed away the imperial bodyguards behind them. He fiercely glared at her and secretly cursed. When this girl gets angry, she doesn't care about the situation. She didn't even learn the slightest bit of Jiao Er's temperament and scheming. This time it would be difficult to deceive them. Hellion Vivian didn't need to think to know what he was planning. Did he want to leave things unsettled? How could there be such an easy thing in this world? It's said that Prime Minister Su has always been impartial. Now that your two granddaughters have framed and insulted me, I don't know how Prime Minister Su wants to deal with this. Hellion Wei calmly and unhurriedly blocked the guards who wanted to take Hellion Mei away. Just like that, she lazily stood on the main road, allowing no one to leave. The masters didn't say anything. Even Tu Su Feng and Grandmaster Zizun had a quiet appearance. However, their gazes were all cast on Su Jiacheng's body, bringing along an indescribable sense of oppression. Su Jiacheng knew that he couldn't continue to act like a fool. In his heart he couldn't wait to skin this little vile spawn. This little vile spawn's one sentence pushed him to the heart of the struggle. If he didn't take out something, he was afraid that even his reputation would be damaged. He was a high-ranking official in the imperial court, and the biggest taboo was to lose his prestige. He didn't know why the other party had latched onto this point of his, but Su Jiacheng understood that this time, even if he couldn't bear to, he still had to put on an act in front of everyone. To think that he had been in the court for so many years, yet he was forced to such a state by a little bastard. Su Jiacheng bit down on the thin meat in his mouth, but his expression didn't change. Weighing the situation left and right, he calmly opened his mouth. Jiao Xiaomei, grandfather knows that you two didn't sincerely plan to frame your eldest sister. However, your natural natures are mischievous and mischievous. You simply didn't care about the seriousness of the matter and spoke without thinking, causing your eldest sister to be wronged. If grandfather doesn't give Wei an explanation today, it will be against public opinion and etiquette. Since it was your mouth that made the mistake, you should give yourself 20 slaps and admit your mistake. Grandfather. At this moment, even Hellion Jiaoer was stupefied. Her entire body trembled as she looked at Su Jiacheng. She didn't dare to believe that her grandfather would actually make such a decision. How could she continue to stay in White Academy after this? How could Su Jiacheng not know the consequences of this? In the end, he deeply shouted, "Still not making a move?" Hellion Jiaoer stared blankly for a moment. Her eyelashes were tender and beautiful like a half-opened rose with moisture. The Empress had always doted on her. When had she ever treated her like this? Hellion Mei's complexion greatly changed. She didn't dare to believe it as she turned her head, but what she received was her grandfather's cold and indifferent gaze. Helplessly, the person she was most afraid of was her grandfather. She didn't dare to not do what her grandfather wanted her to do, so she could only shrink her neck. Hellion Jiaoer bit her lips until they were bright red. Tears welled up in her eyes. Ever since she was born, she had never suffered this kind of humiliation. She entered White Academy with first-place results and was sought after everywhere. Yet today she had to slap her own mouth in front of everyone. This was all because of that little slut. If it wasn't for her, how could she have fallen to this point? Make your move. Su Jiacheng's voice weakened. In the end, he couldn't bear it and turned his back, not wanting to watch. Hellion Jiaoer and Hellion Mei had no other choice. They could only clench their teeth and slowly raise their hands under everyone's gaze. Once again they slapped their own faces. Their eyes looked at Hellion Vivian, overflowing with poisonous intent. Slap. Once. Slap. Twice. Hearing the sound of the slaps beside her ears, Hellion Vivian only stood there calmly. From beginning to end she didn't change her posture. Until 20 seconds later Hellion Jiaoer stopped her hand. She felt a burning pain on her face as if everyone was looking at her. The thick sense of humiliation almost made her face change color. Right now she only wanted to personally tear Hellion Vivian apart. Su Jiacheng pressed down on her hand and secretly used force. Jiao you and Wei are sisters. How can sisters have overnight hatred? You've always had a kind personality. Grandfather has always known this. Quickly go and apologize to your elder sister. This matter will be considered over. Grandfather. Hellion Jiaoer's eyes were filled with tears. She knew that her grandfather wanted her to go and apologize in order to protect her reputation. However, to make her lower her head in front of that little slut, she really couldn't do it. Su Jiacheng lowered his tone. Quickly go. Yes. Hellion Jiaoer took a deep breath. She moved like a lotus and walked in front of Hellion Vivian. She wanted to maintain her delicate and pitiful image in front of others. However, she discovered that the corner of her mouth was extremely painful. she couldn't help but hate a little more. It was us who misunderstood elder sister. Hellion Vivian looked at her and slowly smiled. Just like what I said to Prime Minister Su before, little sister, allow me to remind you again. It's not a misunderstanding, it's an injustice. You. Hellion Jiaoer was so angry that her small face was distorted. She took a deep breath and forcibly suppressed the viciousness in her throat. Elder sister is right. This little vile spawn. Su Jiaqing clenched his hand and amiably smiled in front of others. Seeing you sisters reconcile as before, this official is also happy. Hellion Vivian looked at him with a smile. Prime Minister Su is right. This indeed makes one happy. Don't worry, everything is just the beginning. In the future there will be more and more things that will make you guys happy. Everything that you guys stole from me and from my mother, I will personally take it back little by little. Su Jiaqing also didn't know why, but when he faced that pair of eyes he unexpectedly felt a trace of black energy overflowing from them. However, he didn't forget his own identity and stiffly smiled. Grandmaster Zizun, you're blessed. You've really accepted a good disciple. Zizun didn't give him the slightest bit of face and coldly said, next there's still the academy exam. Miscellaneous people can leave now. The smile of Su Jiaqing, who was called miscellaneous people, stiffened. His expression was as unsightly as it could be. Zizun didn't care about this and brought his own disciple to another courtyard. He wanted to see what kind of results the superior courtyard's exam would have. According to his conjecture, that stinky brat who lived in Ghost Palace should have appeared long ago. At this time he should have displayed his skills at the superior courtyard. He must show him to his own disciple so that after she knew him she could hide a little further away from that stinky brat. Chapter 44. However, Zizun miscalculated one thing. That is, the elusive His Highness simply didn't take the test at the superior compound. Instead, he took the test at the inferior compound and fine compound's martial test arena where no one went to watch. The academy decided to separate the male and female tests for the sake of ensuring the fairness of the competition. But it also imperceptibly gave His Highness a convenient condition to conceal his identity. Because everyone's attention was only on Hellion Vivian, they wanted to see how she would make a fool of herself. Therefore very few people would know that there was another test in the other compound. How could it be you? Zhang Shijie, who originally wanted to show off his skills in the martial chi competition, looked at the man standing in front of him and couldn't help but take a step back. Beligaju coldly looked down at him and didn't say anything. He slowly moved his wrist, handsome as a god, revealing an unconcealable murderous aura. Wait a minute. Zhang Shijie couldn't control himself and screamed out. He wouldn't forget how terrifying the other person was. This man was just like a venomous snake. It seemed that if he moved he would immediately be swallowed into the other's stomach. The injury on his leg hadn't healed yet. The severe fracture was all bestowed by the man in front of him. But he didn't dare to say anything. Because the other person's thick oppressive feeling actually made him unable to breathe. Not only that. Until now he still hadn't investigated the identity of the man in front of him. He originally thought that he would be an expert hidden in the superior compound. But he didn't expect that he would actually appear here. Could it be that this person was also someone from the 4 great clans who infiltrated? No, it can't be. He'd seen all the people from the 4 great clans, but he'd never even seen this person in front of him. Zhang Shijie stared blankly at the increasingly approaching handsome man. The contempt in his eyes had long been replaced by shock. Who the hell are you? As if he wanted to spit out the shock in his heart, he madly roared. The end of his voice had some unconcealable trembling. On the other hand, Beligaju's thin lips curled into a cold arc. That ascetic and arrogant attitude seemed to be saying that he was not worthy of knowing his identity. Zhang Shijie could feel the murderous aura surging around him like waves. His legs couldn't help but tremble. He immediately threw away the sword in his hand and rolled off the stage, scared witless. He yelled, "I don't want to compete anymore. I want to forfeit. Did you hear that? This young master wants to forfeit." Bailey Jiaju also didn't give chase. He only stood in the same place, raised his hand and flicked his lapel that originally didn't have a trace of dust. His expression was languid, as if the one that escaped was merely a little white mouse. The 2 teachers looked at each other and were somewhat dissatisfied. Ever since they became teachers of the White Academy, They had never encountered such a situation. A student from the good compound who was about to break through to the fire class actually fled in panic in front of a poor student who hadn't done any martial chi testing up until now. If this matter were to spread out, it would be a disgrace to them as teachers. Because it was unprecedented. If other people found out, they would also lose face. They simply announced that Beligaju had won and didn't even let him do a martial chi testing. In any case, after a month, there would naturally be people who would give him a good look. As a result, when this matter spread to other people's ears, it became that the new poor student had good luck and met an opponent who forfeited. As for the truth, only Tu Sufeng, who received the news, knew. After hearing the report, the corners of his mouth curled up. His tone was indifferent. Subduing the enemy's army without fighting, he is considered a talented general. Who is the principal talking about? Su Jiaqing still hadn't left. He stood beside Tu Sufeng and tried his best to warm up the atmosphere. With such a talented general, this old man can introduce him to Lord Murong and let him take care of him a bit more. Tu Sufeng glanced at him. That glance made Su Jiaqing somewhat baffled. He didn't know if he was thinking too much. Why did he unexpectedly see a hint of ridicule in Tu Sufeng's eyes? That shouldn't be possible. Tu Sufeng had always been gentle. Thank you for your concern, Prime Minister Su. He's only a junior and his conduct is a bit arrogant. He probably doesn't want to be taken care of by anyone. After Tu Sufeng finished speaking, he wanted to laugh. If he didn't remember incorrectly, that stinking brat didn't even reach the age of 10 and had already oppressed all the aristocratic young masters in the capital. Now Su Jiaqing actually said in front of him that he wanted someone to take care of him? If Su Jiaqing knew that the person he wanted to take care of was that highness, who knew what kind of expression he would have? Su Jiaqing couldn't see through what the other was thinking. Seeing that he spoke politely, he didn't think much of it. Since it's like this, principal, you can go ahead and do your work. This old man will stroll around a bit more. Prime Minister Su. Tu Sufeng opened his mouth to stop Su Jiaqing's footsteps. He said in a refined manner, what Grandmaster said is correct. This is White Academy. Retired Emperor has also made a rule that any minister is prohibited from wandering around here. This will affect the mood of the students. If Prime Minister Su doesn't have any important matters, then please return. I still have matters to attend to, so I won't be able to properly entertain Prime Minister Su. Su Jiaqing, who had been rebuffed twice in a row, ground his teeth until they made a sound. He stood under the tree with a dark old face. Looking at Tu Sufeng's departing figure, his eyes were filled with unconcealable anger. Each and every one of you, who do you think you are? Now that there were only his own people left here, Su Jiaqing didn't have anything to hide. The teachers tried their best to curry favor with him. Senior Su, please calm down. The principal is still young, we can't do anything about it. Retired Emperor, that old man's thoughts can't be seen through. Letting such a young person become the principal, and for so many years at that, sigh. That's right. Some of the older great masters also chimed in from the side, their expressions rather helpless. Su Jiaqing put on a generous appearance. Forget it, they're all juniors. This old man also won't bicker with them. Actually, the information that I asked you to investigate, have you made any progress? Rest assured, Senior, this old man is at the superior compound. One of the great masters replied rather complacently, as long as the third prince enters the superior compound, the first person to get the news will be this old man. Su Jiaqing nodded his head in satisfaction. Good, very good. In addition, I'll have to trouble Great Master to take care of this granddaughter of mine. As he spoke, he extended his hand and patted Helian Jiaoer's shoulder. His heart was filled with hatred and heartache. That great master immediately continued. Miss Helian Vivian's innate talent is exceptionally good. Even in the superior compound, she's also a well-known figure. Senior Su doesn't need to care about what happened just now. This is only a small test. That trash is good at currying favor, so it's inevitable that Great Master will be momentarily muddle-headed and be unable to see through people. By the time Great Master understands, it'll be too late for him to hate her. After all, that Helian Vivian doesn't have the slightest bit of martial chi. She definitely won't be able to learn martial cultivation. Even this test was merely a fluke. Chapter 45. Although Su Jiaqing's mouth didn't say anything, his expression explained everything. What the teacher said was what he was thinking. However, this was White Academy after all. He wouldn't be stupid enough to admit his own thoughts in front of so many people. He only smiled and changed the topic. It's getting late, this old man should also leave. Leave the matter of sending this old man to this old man's 2 granddaughters. Everyone naturally didn't dare to have any objections. They only urged Hellion Jiaoer and Hellion Mei to definitely send Lord Su down the mountain. Playing. Once Hellion Jiaoer left the academy, she couldn't suppress her anger anymore. She kicked away the bodyguard in front of her. The bodyguards knew that their master's mood wasn't good, so they didn't dare to say anything. Grandfather. Hellion Jiaoer cried uncomfortably. Her flower-like face was beaten until it was unbearably red and swollen. Her eyes were brimming with venom. You always told us to endure a bit more. If we continue to endure, that little slut will climb all over my head. It's nothing for your granddaughter to suffer a little, but grandfather, look at her attitude today. She clearly wants to embarrass you. When Su Jiaqing heard this, his face changed. He first threw a tantrum at the bodyguards, then extended his hand and stroked Hellion Jiaoer's back. Grandfather knows that you've been wrong this time. But Jiaoer, you must remember your future riches and honor are indescribable. It's not worth dirtying your hands for such a little vile spawn. Grandfather's meaning is that I should continue to be on good terms with Lord Murong? Hellion Jiaoer was always smarter than Hellion Mei. Hellion Mei was still in a daze when Hellion Jiaoer more or less figured out the other layer of meaning in Su Jiaqing's words. Su Jiaqing smiled and nodded. It's good to continue to be on good terms with the Lord. However, grandfather didn't come this time because of the Lord, but because of another person. There's news from the palace that in this year's martial qi competition, the retired emperor will secretly visit the Phoenix Pavilion to watch. Although it's called a test, it's actually a consort selection for the 3rd prince. At that time there will be many experts entering the capital. Not only will there be students from the White Academy, there will also be many experts from the people participating in the competition. You must win. The 3rd prince is choosing a consort? Hellion Jiaoer exclaimed. Su Jiaqing saw his granddaughter's joy in his eyes, and the corners of his mouth curved into an arc. Grandfather knows that you have feelings for His Highness. The retired emperor's eunuch has already spread the word that the 3rd prince will also leave Ghost Palace and enter the academy to resume his studies. You're also in the superior compound, so you must think of a way to seize this opportunity and interact with the 3rd prince more often. Grandfather. Hellion Jiaoer blushed and pinched the handkerchief in her hand. She was bashful as if she was experiencing her first awakening of love. Su Jiaqing laughed heartily. You're still shy. Grandfather only knows how to make fun of Jiaoer. Hellion Jiaoer acted like a spoiled child as she stamped her feet. Then she laughed and her eyes carried a trace of pride. Daughter will definitely amaze everyone in the competition. Su Jiaqing looked at her appearance and seemed to have thought of something. His mouth slightly opened and his pleasantly surprised expression couldn't be concealed. Jiaoer, could it be that you've advanced? Hellion Jiaoer nodded her head, and her thin lips carried a smiling expression. Grandfather wanted me to drink that year and it helped me. When I advanced, I always felt a warm current in my body. The people of the Hellion family only have this little benefit. Su Jiaqing stroked his own white beard. Originally, I wanted to take advantage of this visit to the academy to have Grandmaster Zizun accept you as a disciple. However, looking at it now, that old man is also a muddle-headed worm. He didn't accept a genius like you but instead accepted a piece of trash. Now, as long as Hellion Jiaoer heard Hellion Vivian's name, her heart would feel stifled. When I was at the defense department, I tested her quite a bit. She was indeed a hedonist, but she was an idiot who didn't know anything. However, today, speaking to this point, Hellion Jiaoer paused for a moment before asking in a deep voice, Grandfather, do you think that the poison we put in her body before didn't have any effect? Could it be that she recovered her martial qi? Otherwise, with her ability, she definitely wouldn't be younger sister's opponent. Su Jiaqing was also thinking about this problem. However, very quickly he shook his head. That's impossible. As long as someone is poisoned by the devouring heaven poison, they will completely lose their martial qi and their meridians will be damaged. Even with the help of an expert like Grandmaster Zizun, it would still be impossible for the originally damaged meridians to be healed. What's more, so many years have passed. That little vile spawn's body has already been emptied of all of her vitality by the devouring heaven poison. Ordinary fighting and killing is still possible, but it's simply impossible for her to cultivate again. This is because her meridians are already dead. In this lifetime she will never have martial chi again. But Hellion Jiaoer still wanted to say something. Hellion Mei clenched her teeth and interrupted her. Second sister, that little slut was only lucky for a moment. I still have injuries on my body, so I haven't used all of my martial chi. He's also a little clever. I don't know what she did, but she made me stay there and couldn't even move. Otherwise, I would have already treated her as a cripple. How could I still let her be so arrogant? Hellion Jiaoer also remembered that at that time, Hellion Mei really didn't move at all. Second sister, she couldn't even light up the crystal ball. What martial chi could she have? She simply took advantage of the time when we weren't paying attention and used some underhanded method. Hellion Mei was so angry that both of her hands were clenched. She wholeheartedly believed that Hellion Vivian played a trick. Su Jiaqing wrinkled his white eyebrows. This little vile spawn is indeed a little strange. However, you also heard what the teacher said just now. Her path won't be long. Without martial chi, no matter how smart she is, she won't be able to learn martial arts. Grandmaster Zizun will expel her sooner or later. Jiao Er, as a woman, you must remember to understand that your hands must be as clean as possible. Only by being a little softer will you be able to gain the favor of men. In the future you will definitely be indescribably noble. Restrain your thoughts on His Highness in the air, understand? Hellion Jiaoer's eyes turned, overflowing with light. Jiao Er understands grandfather's words. It's just that Jiao Er is afraid that little slut will play some tricks on the martial chi testing platform. After hearing this, Su Jiaqing's eyes also flashed. Don't worry, there will naturally be people who will deal with her. Grandfather will make her regret participating in the martial chi competition. Really? Hellion Jiaoer's eyes lit up. Grandfather, what do you plan to do? Su Jiaqing patted her hand, his thin lips raised into a smile. Since ancient times, money can make even ghosts turn millstones. As long as we can bribe those teachers, you don't have to worry about this matter. You only have to take care of yourself. Even if you want to do something like dealing with Hellion Vivian, you have to use other people. Don't dirty your own hands. Grandfather's teachings are right. Hellion Jiaoer smiled and leaned over. Grandfather's idea is still the best. Once we bribe the teachers, whether we win or lose, it will be up to us. No matter how powerful that little slut's methods are, she can only kneel and beg for mercy. Su Jiaqing thought of that scene and also laughed. All right, although the martial chi competition is important, if we can't find the third prince, everything will be in vain. You must pay attention to the superior compound. I keep feeling that His Highness has already arrived. Chapter 46. This year, there are actually 3 new students from the inferior compound who passed the test. This is really unexpected. The teacher who was compiling the test data held the file in his hand. His face was full of astonishment. The previous year's report cards were still there. Every new student from the inferior compound who was able to pass the test generally chose auxiliary courses. But this year martial chi and divination were both passed. This was truly a miracle. There were also some people who didn't care at all. It's only a moment of luck. You see, there's still one person's opponent who abandoned the competition. This doesn't mean anything. Then how should this reward be given? The teachers sat on the wooden chairs and looked at each other. They stroked their white beards, not knowing how to make a decision. In the end, they could only set their sights on the superior compound's master. After all, the reward given at the beginning was that the winner could directly enter the superior compound. But now, jumping directly from the inferior compound to the superior compound, this was a situation that had never happened before. This old man proposes to cancel this time's reward. The one who spoke was the martial chi master who was in charge of the superior compound. With a straight face, he said in a dignified manner, "We can't let some students who simply can't pass come to our superior compound just because of a moment of luck. You're the head of the compound. Even if you're young, you should also understand that if we give out the reward like this, it's very likely that it will cause the other compounds to be dissatisfied. What's more, White Academy's superior compound students have all been carefully selected over the years. In the future, maybe they'll be chosen by the battle spirit forces. We can't just casually arrange 3 students to enter like this and break the rules." Tu Su Feng calmly listened, one hand holding the teacup. His tone was flat. This principal believes that White Academy's rules are to do what one says. His expression didn't change at all. The corners of his mouth even carried a gentle smile, but the oppressive feeling that hit them in the face made all the teachers feel an enormous evil aura. The teachers present naturally weren't willing to see the dean and the superior compound's master contradict each other because of this kind of thing. They promptly interrupted. The reward is still a must, but Master Li Yan's considerations aren't completely without reason. Can you see how this works? Those 3 poor students still haven't bought enough things to enter the superior compound. Why don't we directly reward each of them with a set? It can also be considered as solving one of their troubles. This suggestion was very compromising. The superior compound's Master Li Yan naturally agreed. If it was up to him, it would be nothing more than a group of small characters without any power. In the future they wouldn't have much future prospects. Giving them clothes would be a waste. Tu Sufeng didn't say much. He only curved his thin lips, and the corners of his mouth carried a bit of evil. Sooner or later, these people would regret today's decision. It was likely that they would never have thought that the 3 students they spoke of who relied on luck to win, one was this dynasty's young genius priest, and the other was the 3rd prince that they desperately wanted to rope in, Beligaju. At noon, all the teachers and students gathered in the trading hall to announce the results of the test. With regards to the matter of not being able to enter the superior compound, after a certain highness heard about it, he didn't have the slightest bit of reaction. The side of his grave and stern distinct face carried an arc of a smile that wasn't a smile. He looked indescribably handsome and demonically cold. Nangong Lai, on the other hand, was rather regretful. I heard that the superior compound has a lot of girls. I still wanted to go take a look. Hellion Vivian's expression was the most difficult for people to guess. The light in her eyes was rather gloomy. The teachers even thought that she was dissatisfied with the academy's arrangement. Just as they were about to open their mouths, they heard her ask in a clear voice, "Can't these clothes be exchanged for banknotes?" The teachers. "Ha, Aju, look at these old men's expressions. It's too funny." Nangong Lai was practically about to collapse from laughing. How much did this Hellion family's young miss love banknotes in the end? She made the teachers stare blankly. Interesting, truly interesting. So these are the people from the inferior compound. Truly, seeing once is believing 100 times. The person sitting next to Nangong Lai coldly humphed. His handsome face carried a mocking smile. He wore a Chinese silver gown, and the ornaments on his waist looked more luxurious than the others. When he stood to receive the award, Hellion Vivian could clearly feel the waves of martial qi on his body. When they brushed past each other, that person's voice didn't carry the slightest bit of warmth. Don't think that just because you defeated those defective goods from the fine compound, you really think that you're unrivaled under the heavens. You're still far from it. After he finished speaking, that person floated away. His light white gown slightly drooped, his long hair wasn't tied up or tied, and his pair of eyes seemed to conceal the source of disaster. Floating up and down, he was both good and evil. For a moment, everyone's gazes concentrated on his body. One after another they started whispering to each other, their faces carrying obvious pleasant surprise. "It's him. Yuanling Xian." Yuanling Xian? Heavens, that's the young master of the head of the 4 great clans? I heard that Yunling Xian reached Earth rank when he was 7 years old. Now that so many years have passed, even the clan heads of the 4 great clans aren't clear on how powerful he really is. Some time ago he was even called to the imperial palace by the emperor to discuss how to resist the Xiongnu together. How could even he be at the superior compound? This is simply not leaving us, the common folk, a way to survive. The sound of gasps resounded throughout the entire courtyard. Almost everyone impatiently watched Yunling Xian receive the award, their mouths wide open. Hellion Vivian only casually yawned and indifferently sat in her own seat. One hand propped up her chin and the mole at the corner of her eye faintly glowed. Bailey Jiaju sat by her side, his slender fingers twirling the black jade thumb ring. The sparkling sunlight shone over. Even his fingertips were sparkling and glowing. He didn't show the slightest difference, as if it didn't matter to him who appeared. Nangong Lai put his arm on the back of the chair and casually leaned back, a demonic smile on his face. The 3 people sitting together, no matter how you looked at it, gave people the feeling of unbridled provocation. This made Yunling Xian, who was standing on the stage, coldly narrow his eyes. The award in his hand changed shape. They really were a group of idiots who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Sooner or later he would teach them a lesson. Look, those are the 3 people who won in the martial chi test. As soon as Hellion Vivian walked into the inferior compound's ancestral hall, many students looked towards her and whispered, "I heard that Grandmaster Zizun also accepted her as a disciple. I wonder if she can make an armament for me." Make an armament? Someone sneered, "Don't dream about it. Why don't you go ask around why Grandmaster Zizun accepted her as a disciple? Our inferior compound's face has been completely lost by her. Relying on currying favor with others to climb up, it's really enough." Bang! The sound of a stool rang out. The people in the ancestral hall instantly fell silent. Hellion Vivian handsomely retracted her leg. The corners of her mouth were half-hooked as she sat in the middle of the group of gossiping girls, looking at them with a cold expression. The girls looked at each other, their faces unspeakably awkward. They all turned their heads away and pretended to pick up the scrolls on the short table. Hellion Vivian felt that it was quiet. She directly laid down on the short table, her hands playing with some small scrap iron that resembled toys. Beligaju sat next to her. After seeing those small scrap iron, his eyes flashed. His ivory white fingers reached over and pressed down on Hellion Vivian's wrist. Chapter 47. He pretended to be puzzled and asked, "What is this? Looks very interesting." Nan Gonglai opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. Beligaju glanced over and Nan Gonglai instantly shut up. He only cursed in his heart. "You, a 7-year-old who played with all kinds of armaments, actually have the nerve to pretend to be a novice. Don't tell me you really didn't see what those scrap iron were for. There are countless of them in Ghost Palace for you to play with." It had to be said that a certain highness acting skills were really too good. That pair of deep eyes carried an unprecedented cleanness, making Hellion Vivian, this ace agent, not the slightest bit of doubt. She lazily explained, "It's for practice, an ordinary armament. It hasn't taken shape yet. When it's done, I'll give it to you." Speaking to this point, she paused, then said, "Consider it as compensation for seeing your body that day." Nan Gonglai didn't drink a mouthful of water and almost spat it out, choking until he coughed. This Hellion family's eldest daughter's way of doing things was really bold. In the capital, which family's young lady would bluntly say things like, "So your body?" It had to be said that a certain highness taste was really unique. "I'm looking forward to it." At first, Beligaju stared blankly, then he slowly smiled, his thin lips carrying a shocking evil. Nan Gonglai watched from the side and trembled from head to toe, starting to calculate how many days the Hellion family's eldest daughter could live. What he didn't expect was that Aju looked like his mood really was a bit better than before, so much so that he even gracefully arranged the scrap iron for Hellion Vivian to use in order. But this wasn't anything strange. A certain highness temperament had always been unpredictable. Even he didn't know what he was thinking sometimes. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows at the man's movements, indifferently said, "You just heard those people's words. Aren't you afraid that the things I make won't be presentable?" "Not afraid." With the same indifferent tone, Beligaju supported his face with one hand and continued to arrange the scrap iron for her with the other hand. His black hair was half hanging down and the smell of books was blowing in her face. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused and took the scrap iron from his hand. "These things are not good. When I find something suitable in the future, I will make it for you." Since he believed in her, she should treat him differently. Beligaju was someone who had seen countless top-notch martial arts. Naturally, he also knew that this ice iron was somewhat damaged. However, his face had a hazy expression of not understanding, a lazy expression of pity. Hellion Vivian knew that basically all of the new students who entered the academy wanted to obtain an armament that belonged to them. However, due to the preciousness of armaments, the academy didn't equip all of the new students with one. Instead, all of the resources were given to the superior compound. Therefore, it wasn't strange for this man to want to obtain an armament. But Hellion Vivian kept feeling that something was a little strange. Right, she remembered. "When I first met you, didn't you bring your guards with you? How come in the end, you were reduced to not even being able to afford a scholar's hat?" Nan Gonglai's figure paused. It's over. Their identities were going to be exposed. Beligaju faintly extended his gaze. His tone was very indifferent, as if he was merely stating a fact. I lost all of my martial chi. My family only helped me pay the academy fees. They only sent an accompanying bodyguard to follow me. After that they didn't do anything else. When Hellion Vivian heard this, she suddenly had a feeling that they were in the same boat. She rather handsomely patted his shoulder. Don't be sad. In the future they will definitely regret it. Nangong Lai looked at her movements and the corner of his mouth fiercely twitched twice. Eldest Miss Hellion, the one who will regret it in the future is you. There has never been anyone who dared to pat the royal's shoulder like this. Really? Beligaju retracted his gaze and slightly lowered his eyes. That hair was black and soft. At first glance he simply looked like a freshly baked, obedient and beautiful young man. Nangong Lai's expression as he watched from the side was very tangled. Pretending, too good at pretending. Does the retired emperor know that you're so good at pretending? On the contrary, Hellion Vivian stroked his head. The smile on the corner of her mouth was incomparably free and easy. Don't worry. With this big sister covering you, you'll be able to regain your face in a matter of minutes. After Hellion Vivian finished speaking, she saw Beligaju's shoulders tremble twice. She even thought that he was moved, so she extended her claws and stroked his head twice. What she didn't know was that Beligaju, who had his back turned, had a smile that wasn't a smile on his face. He almost couldn't hold back the pleasure that overflowed from his throat. Ah, this little thing, as expected, the more he looked at her, the more interesting she became. It made him more and more unwilling to restore his identity and go to the superior compound. The teacher has arrived. It wasn't known who shouted this, but the entire ancestral hall immediately quieted down. A great master wearing a white robe walked in, held an ancient scroll and started the true meaning of the first class. Hellion Vivian didn't listen. Her fingers nimbly fiddled with those pieces of scrap iron. One could hear an extremely small but very regular sound. Probably because her movements were too beautiful, the sound seemed to have an additional kind of indescribable musical feeling in the ears. After the teacher finished speaking, he patrolled with his hands behind his back. When he patrolled to where she was, his old face sank. What are you holding in your hands? Hellion Vivian swept away the end of the scroll with a pog sound. Her expression was as light as the wind and clouds. For a moment the teacher felt that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He used a white handkerchief to wipe his eyelids, then looked at Hellion Vivian's short table. Other than a brand new armament there was nothing else. Could it be that he really saw wrongly? The teacher shook his head, put his hands behind his back and said in a deep voice, "Concentrate, don't look around." Hellion Vivian absent-mindedly acknowledged. After the teacher left, she continued to fiddle with the second pile of scrap iron as if nothing had happened. After the entire class, the teacher wandered to Hellion Vivian's place no less than 3 times, but he didn't find anything. After class, only 2 figures were left in the ancestral hall. One of them was fiddling with the scrap iron on the short table next to him. His expression was indifferent, but his eyes flickered with playfulness. Nangong Lai sighed in admiration as he stroked his chin. A girl who doesn't even have martial chi was actually able to make 3 armaments in a short period of time. During this time she even stuffed strawberries into her mouth from time to time. She's simply abnormal enough. Aju, even that old man Tu Tian can't possibly reach this level, right? Beligaju stood up, his slender fingers brushing across those already in embryonic form of armaments. Thinking of what that little thing said, he smiled evilly. Indeed not bad. Huh? Nangong Lai followed up. Wait, what you said not bad, are you referring to these armaments or people? Also, what was going on with him just now? What did he mean by his family only helped him pay the hospital fees and only sent an accompanying bodyguard to follow him? It was clearly him who thought that too many people would be annoying, okay? That's why until now, those ministers and teachers were still anxiously waiting for the carriage sent by the imperial family, but they didn't know that this person had already arrived 1 step ahead of them. Chapter 48. Aju, I have to remind you that you're still the prince of the Dragon War Empire. Don't pretend too much, he won't be able to digest it. Even his hair is trembling. Beligaju glanced at him and returned to his cold and ascetic appearance. He then walked out of the ancestral hall. Nangong Lai looked left and right. Speaking of which, where did that girl go? Why hasn't she come back yet? The people outside the ancestral hall were all resting. A girl heard Nangong Lai's words and answered shyly, "Are you asking about that Hellion Vivian?" You know. Nangong Lai curled his lips into a smile like the wind. The girl's face was still red and she said softly, "Just now, someone saw Lord Murong send a servant to look for her. She should have gone to the Commerce Courtyard to keep the appointment. After all, she has liked Lord Murong for so long. No matter how tough she is in front of others, she will find a way to get back together. If you want to look for her, you can go to the Commerce Courtyard to take a look." Baligaju's slender fingers paused. He listened quietly, his face expressionless. "Since she wants to get back together, it's not good for us to disturb her." Nangong Lai leaned back and smiled. "What did I say?" Loosening the reins to grasp them. "This little girl's move is pretty good." Hearing this, the scrap iron in Baligaju's hand was slightly sluggish. Layers of veins broke on the iron body. Nangong Lai looked at him strangely. "Aju?" "Yes." Baligaju's tone was indifferent. His face was cold. Nangong Lai touched the bridge of his nose. He didn't know why, but he felt that Aju was angry just now. Baligaju didn't pay attention to him anymore. He slowly walked out of the courtyard. His slender figure quickly disappeared into the boundless dusk. "Your Highness." When no one was around, a shadow swept past the treetops and landed on one knee on the ground. Baligaju's eyes slightly swept over the people kneeling on the ground. The corner of his mouth was cold. "Go and inform the royal army to wait for me at the foot of the mountain." "Yes." Shadow paused for a moment before lowering his eyes to accept the order. A trace of astonishment flashed through his eyes. His Highness had been playing hide-and-seek with the retired emperor these past few days, but now he had the imperial army wait at the foot of the mountain. Did he agree to choose a consort? Sunset. People were coming and going in the trading compound. The manservant, who was dressed like a scholar, raised his chin slightly and looked at Hellion Vivian, as if he had given her a lot of face by coming to find her. "Hellion Vivian, my young master said that he can let bygones be bygones. But you think about it carefully. If this engagement is called off, there will be no room for negotiation. Are you done?" Hellion Vivian's face was cold, and her tone was neither fast nor slow. "If you're done, then hurry up and get lost." She wasn't unfamiliar with this manservant. He was always by Murong Chongfeng's side, always thinking of himself as superior. When he saw the noble ladies, he never saluted. She had to say this was all because he was spoiled. When had the manservant ever suffered this kind of humiliation? No matter who saw him, they would be polite. He represented Murong Manor's face, yet this woman actually didn't put him in her eyes. In the past, she would chase after him everywhere, asking him to bring news to the young master. Now she actually asked him to get lost. "Murong Weiwei, don't regret this." The manservant clenched his teeth and left in a huff. Hellion Vivian picked her ears rather disapprovingly. Her eyes swept over the surrounding people who were watching the play. With one hand in her pocket, she stepped into the street without a change in expression. He was naturally lazy and free. These people really don't have eyes." Yuan Ming's voice was as arrogant as usual. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "You're awake? It seems that you've recovered quite well. If you fight a few more rounds, I'll be even better than now." Yuan Ming licked the corner of his lips, his face was bloodthirsty. Hellion Vivian stroked the ancient book in her hand and lightly smiled. "Don't worry, I've already thought of whose blood I'll release." Yuan Ming looked at the young girl in front of him with a devilish smile, his thin lips slightly curved. "White Academy, you guys definitely wouldn't have thought that after a few hundred years I would return." "What did you say?" Murong Chongfeng listened to the manservant's report. The teacup in his hand was almost twisted out of shape. The manservant was indignant. "That woman who doesn't know what's good for her actually told me to get lost." "Young master, it's not that I'm talkative, but this kind of woman, even if you have good intentions, it's still wasted." Murong Chongfeng was already upset. Now that he heard the manservant's words, his chest felt like it was being pressed by a stone, suffocating somewhat. He really didn't expect that when he had the intention to ask for peace, that woman would actually reject him. Crack. Murong Chongfeng ruthlessly smashed the teacup in his hand. The resulting splash of water splashed onto the manservant's face. The manservant was startled, his face pale, and he didn't dare to say another word. Murong Chongfeng took a deep breath, his face revealing a disdainful expression. "You're right, A woman who doesn't know what's good for her is not worthy of this lord's good intentions. He originally wanted to take her to see his father, but since she couldn't lift her head in public, then forget it. She only curried favor with Grandmaster Zizun. Did she really think that she could rely on herself? He wasn't anxious, sooner or later she would come back to beg him. Murong Chongfeng glanced sideways at the manservant. Has Lord Father arrived? Prince has already arrived, he's currently talking with the masters, he'll come back once he's done. The manservant's voice fell. Emperor Murong walked in. He was wearing a Chinese court attire, exuding an air of wealth and prestige. Seeing his beloved son, his solemn face finally showed traces of a smile. Feng, father. Murong Chongfeng promptly stood up. Emperor Murong patted his shoulder. You did well just now, those masters praised you for a long time. It's just some flattery. Murong Chongfeng's cold and handsome face didn't change in the slightest. Emperor Murong fancied his beloved son's arrogance. Good, what Feng said is right, it's just some flattery. I came this time because I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to maintain a calm heart. Now seeing that you're so calm, father is gratified. Oh right, where's Master Tu Lao? Why didn't I see him in the academy this time? Master is still looking for the genius he met at the Phoenix Pavilion that day. Murong Chongfeng clenched his hands. I don't know what kind of person that person is, to actually make Master so concerned. Even when I came to White Academy he didn't appear. Emperor Murong lowered his eyes and said, no matter who that person is, it doesn't matter. Although it's hard to become a martial cultivator, Feng, don't forget what you need to do in the end is to find a way to find the battle spirit forces, then become a member of them. Becoming a martial cultivator is only a springboard for you to enter the battle spirit forces. Father, don't worry, I've never forgotten what you said. When Murong Chongfeng raised his eyes again, his face was full of determination. Emperor Murong nodded in satisfaction, stroking his beard. Feng, have you heard of a person called Huan Mingxiang, a senior official of 3 dynasties? Chapter 49. Naturally, I've heard of him. Murong Chongfeng glanced to the side as if he was thinking of something. It's said that he's in White Academy, but very few people can recognize him. Father, why are you suddenly asking about him? Murong Wang's eyes flashed with coldness. Why would an elder of 3 dynasties hide in the academy, not caring about worldly affairs? There's definitely a problem here. According to what people say, the battle spirit forces are called spirits because they're mysteriously hidden in every corner of White Academy. Aside from retired emperor who knows their true identity, no one else can find out who they are. But there's one thing, they're definitely in the academy. Father's meaning is that this Huan Mingxiang is a member of the battle spirit forces? After Murong Chongfeng thought of this conjecture, he somewhat couldn't control his emotions. But ever since I entered the academy, I haven't seen any proud and unyielding old man. Huan Mingxiang is a strange person, always appearing and disappearing like a ghost. Maybe he'll disguise himself as one of the academy's teachers. Murong Wang stroked his chin, deep in thought. But no matter what, he'll be in the superior compound. After all, this is the best place to enter the battle spirit forces. What you need to do is to treat each and every teacher with respect. I have a premonition that when a new student enters the academy, the battle spirit forces guide will definitely appear. Swish, swish, swish. In the northeast corner of the commercial park, an old man with a hunched back was holding a broom in his hand, silently sweeping the fallen leaves on the ground. This was a place specifically for students to read. There were many books and ancient scrolls. However, the descendants of famous families who had already been influenced by martial qi countless times didn't feel that this place was worth coming to. Except for Hellion Vivian. She lost her martial qi when she was 7 years old, so there were many things that no one taught her. Even if there was Yuan Ming who killed a god, he was only a demon. He could only increase her battle strength, but those systematic martial arts still had to rely on herself. In such a large courtyard, besides the old man sweeping the floor, there was a young girl earnestly reading a book. Under the radiance of the setting sun, it was indescribably peaceful. However, no one noticed that when that ordinary-looking old man raised his eyes, a sharp light flashed in the corner of his eyes. He held the broom in his hand and unintentionally swept it in front of Hellion Vivian. He coughed heavily twice and pointed at the tall bookshelf. Little girl, I see that you are taller than me. Can you help this old man take that book away so that I can clean it? Hellion Vivian, who was concentrating on reading the book, didn't notice that there was an old man here. Seeing that his legs were really inconvenient, she stood up and took the ancient book. After giving it to the old man, she planned to continue studying. Unexpectedly, the old man in front of him suddenly disappeared. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and quickly looked behind her. The old man had already changed his posture. He hovered in midair with one hand behind his back and the other stroking his beard. His sleeves fluttered slightly, making him look like an immortal. His voice was deep and resounding. This old man has been cleaning this place for many years. You are the first person who is willing to help this old man. This little girl has a good heart. It's just a small matter. Hellion Vivian's expression didn't change much. She reached out and put down the ancient book with a faint smile on her face. Yuan Ming narrowed his eyes. Woman, this old man is not simple. Should be careful. Hellion Vivian gave Yuan Ming a reassuring hand gesture. She didn't feel that this old man had any malicious intentions. Years of living with firearms had given her an instinct to distinguish between danger and not. From this old man she only saw bright eyes and interest. He didn't avoid her at all. This meant that the old man was safe. The old man seemed to admire Hellion Vivian's calmness. It was rare for him to smile. Little girl, this old man never owes anyone. Since you helped this old man will also return something to you. As he spoke, he pointed at the tree branch and used the moved Song Shanmu Yuan. It was condensed and heavy, strange and complex. It had the power to split mountains and split rocks. Hellion Vivian's eyes suddenly narrowed. Her body was like a shadow, agile and unpredictable. Like the shadow of a plum blossom, she drove the wind around her. She used chi to break the attack. The old man's eyes lit up and continued to attack. Hellion Vivian had always been very fast. Every move was nimbly avoided by her. However, she was still relatively unfamiliar with martial chi. Gradually, she felt that her strength was falling short of her desire. The old man took the opportunity to attack. When he thought that the outcome was already decided, he didn't expect that Hellion Vivian would use the move that he had used before. He was stunned at first, then put down the bamboo branch. He smiled and said, "Good, good, good. There is actually such a smart girl in this world. Wonderful, wonderful." Hellion Vivian smiled but didn't say anything. She had been wandering between the black and white for many years in the 21st century. She had already developed a superhuman memory. Naturally, she could apply what she had learned. When she was in battle, she could change according to the actual situation. She had been carrying a machine gun all year round in the Yunnan and Zhonghai regions. What kind of situation had she not encountered? Now that she was holding a branch, it was as easy as moving her fingers. Her heart moved at will. Every move she made was natural and handsome. Come, come, come. I'll pass on another set of flames swallowing the heavens to you. He had waited here for so many years. Finally, he had waited for a good seedling that was to his liking. The old man laughed loudly in his heart. His face was also filled with unconcealable excitement. If it was this girl, she would definitely be able to learn his ultimate move. When she first heard the words flames swallowing the heavens, Hellion Vivian's heart also brightened. In the Dragon War Empire, even a 3-year-old child would have heard of this secret art. It was said that this secret art had already been lost along with the retirement of 3 generations of elders, Huan Ming Xiang. Now this old man unexpectedly wanted to pass it on to her. Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. She naturally thought of the old man's identity. However, after a moment she shook her head. Flames swallowing the heavens, I still won't learn it. Why? Huan Ming Xiang was greatly shaken. Could it be that she was the same as that arrogant brat in the palace, hating waking up early? Hellion Vivian smiled. Although I haven't been practicing martial arts for long, I've also comprehended a bit of truth. Elder Huan's flames swallowing the heavens should belong to the fire element. However, up until now, I've also sensed that my martial chi has nothing to do with fire. You? Huan Ming Xiang didn't find it strange that Hellion Vivian would guess his identity. After all, this little girl was so smart. She was able to see through it with just a hint. Only, he rubbed his chin and suddenly wrinkled his white eyebrows. Your martial chi path is very strange. It's like you've suffered some kind of heavy injury. It's a bit nondescript, yet you can win by surprise. Girl, what exactly are you cultivating? After Hellion Vivian heard this, she smiled. In any case, my martial chi path is very different from this flame swallowing the heavens. In this world, there are many kinds of mysterious martial arts that can't be learned. Learning too many isn't necessarily a good thing. Who knows, maybe I won't be able to control myself and will suffer from chi deviation. The way I am right now is quite good. I'm comfortable practicing it myself and I can use it easily. Hearing this, Huan Mingxiang stared blankly for a moment. Then his eyes lit up as he looked at Hellion Vivian. I really didn't expect. In this world, most people who practice martial arts can't overcome the greed in their hearts. But you actually comprehended this truth early on. Truly a wonderful person. It's just that I fight a lot. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips and looked at the setting sun. It's getting late. Elder Huan, you should rest early. Don't always sweep the same place. It's easy to reveal your identity. Huan Mingxiang looked at the exceptionally bright ground under his broom. His face was endlessly shocked. After a long time, he extended his hand and stroked his white beard. It wasn't known who he was talking to, but his smile was quite thick. This girl is really incredible. Go to the superior compound and investigate this girl's identity. This year's battle spirit forces can take in new people. Replying to Elder Huan, she's not at the superior compound. The figure kneeling on the ground paused for a moment before speaking the truth. Huan Mingxiang looked back in astonishment. Not at the superior compound? Then which compound is she at? The good compound? Cough cough. The figure coughed twice. She's at the inferior compound. She's that Miss Hellion who casually fawns over people that you've recently been very hateful. Chapter 50. Huan Mingxiang opened his mouth wide, then slowly closed it again. His cheeks slightly puffed up. When did this old man say I hated her? I never did. In the future, if she comes here again, immediately notify this old man. Yes. The figure looked at the old man's departing figure with a profound meaning, lightly laughing as he shook his head. Elder Huan didn't admit it. How could Huan Mingxiang admit it? Rumors and slanders were truly harmful. The old man picked up the broom and continued sweeping the floor. Only this time his movements were clearly much more forceful, as if he was sulking. A perfectly good girl, yet the rumors were so unbearable. If she hadn't come to the trading courtyard this time, wouldn't he have continued to misunderstand? The more the old man thought, the angrier he got. He simply threw away the broom, the corners of his mouth carrying an evil smile. This year we won't be choosing people from the superior compound. It's more interesting to go to each compound. Lest those people from the superior compound always think they're a cut above others. Night Trading Courtyard Armament Shop. The manager looked at the more than 10 armaments in front of him, his eyes astonishingly bright. These were all made by Miss Weiwei yourself? Hellion Vivian indifferently grunted, lightly sipping the tea in her hand. 2 days, it's only been 2 days. The manager admitted that he was once again shocked. One must know that there wasn't a single newly promoted armament master that could produce so many armaments in such a short amount of time. Even among the current armament grandmasters, there wasn't a single one that could achieve this speed. This was too heaven-defying. Hellion Vivian took one of the armaments, looked left and right and said, "This one isn't made very well. Wait until class tomorrow, I'll take it apart and assemble it again." Whatever Miss Weiwei thinks is suitable, you can do it. The manager couldn't see where was good, where was not good. He only felt that disassembling an armament that made people feel awkward was like playing with a toy in her hands. If the disciples of other great masters knew about this, they'd cry themselves to death. Okay, you go ahead and do your business. Don't always disturb my time with my obedient disciple. Grandmaster blew at a corner of his white beard and extended his hand to push the steward out. Where was his usual dignified appearance in front of others? Wait until after the consort selection, all of you have to go home and rest for 2 days. I'm really afraid that after you go back, that big and small Hellion family will shamelessly bully you again. Disciple, listen to Master. If they dare to bully you, come back and find Master. Master will definitely stand up for you. Hellion Vivian chuckled. Master, you don't believe that I can handle it myself? I'm worried about you. Grandmaster sat down on his chair. So what if your martial chi is low? Can't we still make armaments with low martial chi? These people just couldn't eat the grapes and thought that the grapes were sour. They even said that this old man would definitely not be able to stand you and would chase you out of the sect? What a joke. They aren't me. Disciple, don't worry. Even if you don't have martial chi and can't pass the selection, and can't make a martial cultivation, Master will not drive you away. I will still take care of you and give you money. Hellion Vivian knew that the old man really doted on her. This also made her even more determined to cultivate her own power. After being a big shot for so many years, she naturally knew that no matter if it was Su Jiaqing or Hellion Guangyao, mixing in their current position was definitely not by chance. If it weren't for their meticulous thinking and ruthless methods, they wouldn't have divided up the Hellion family's power and spread her mother's reputation to such an unbearable degree. Wanting to move them was definitely not an easy matter. Moreover, compared to dealing with them in one strike, she preferred to do it slowly. Slowly let them taste the taste of having their family destroyed and their people killed, the taste of falling to the bottom of the valley. However, what did she just hear? Consort selection? Hellion Vivian wrinkled her long, shapely eyebrows. What does this have to do with me? She didn't feel that as a good-for-nothing she had any qualifications to be a consort selection. What happened to being a quiet and beautiful young lady? Grandmaster guiltily looked towards the beam of the room. Master also doesn't know why that side chose you. However, Master feels that since you've been chosen, you should go take a look at that royal family member. He's still not bad-looking. Is there any way for me not to go? Hellion Vivian didn't expose the old man. She only indifferently put down the teacup. She still had to do business. She really couldn't find the time to participate in some consort selection. Moreover, she was a second-hand good that had just had her marriage annulled. Wouldn't the royal family be afraid of provoking a fishy smell? Grandmaster lightly coughed twice. Oh, disciple, don't worry. That stinking brat has always disliked women. Moreover, his standards are very high. Even if you go, you may not necessarily be chosen. Hellion Vivian also thought so. Right now she was only a bit whiter than a black coal ball. If it was like this, that royal family member could also choose her. Then she couldn't help but admire that man's sense of beauty. Wait a minute. What did he mean by that stinking brat has always disliked women? Could it be that the world-shaking third prince was actually gay? She seemed to have found out an incredible secret. In short, it's just going through the motions. There are so many candidates for consort selection. Grandmaster was still thinking of a way to persuade his disciple. On the other side, Hellion Vivian had already started laughing. Master, you don't need to say any more. I'll go. At worst, after going, she'd just sit down and sleep and eat pastries. In any case, it was like what Master said. There were so many consort selection candidates. She was just there to make up the numbers. The next day a gentle breeze blew and the sky was clear for thousands of miles. Apart from the westernmost inferior compound, the other compounds looked exceptionally lively. Even the great masters had gone to the dean's place. They were so busy that they didn't have time to attend to them. Everyone was wondering if something big was going to happen. In the ancestral hall, the students sitting at the front and back tables were gathered together to discuss. Their faces were filled with eagerness and excitement. Hey, did you guys hear? It seems that the third prince is coming soon. Is that true? It can't be a lie, right? Doesn't the third prince never leave the ghost palace? The news from the superior compound definitely can't be wrong. Even if the third prince came, so what? He'll definitely go to the superior compound. Some people sighed regretfully. Their faces were filled with disappointment as they looked out the window in a daze. Hellion Vivian didn't change at all. No matter who came or who didn't, she was still lying on the short table and sleeping. In such a large ancestral hall, she was the only one with one hand hanging down. She was sleeping as if there was nothing beside her. The chaos in the surroundings highlighted this scene's comfort and handsomeness. You guys look, she's sleeping again. The chattering changed the style of the discussion. The young girls lowered their voices. She seems to do nothing but sleep all day long. What else can she do? Don't forget, she doesn't have any martial chi. No martial chi and so lazy. Some people shook their heads in disapproval. When the time comes, there'll definitely be no results. Regardless of the tide of criticism from all around, Hellion Vivian was still sleeping lazily. However, Yuan Ming laughed evilly. Woman, did you hear that? If you keep sleeping like this, be careful that you don't get any results on the test. Don't be noisy. Hellion Vivian closed her eyes. Her expression was indifferent. She had a commanding tone. Wait until lunchtime and then wake me up. Probably because she was a bit muddle-headed from sleep, Hellion Vivian forgot to hide her voice for a moment. When it fell into Beligaju's ears, he slightly raised his eyebrows. Chapter 51. Nangong Lai also subconsciously thought that Hellion Vivian's words were directed at Beligaju, so he looked in his direction in astonishment. He was drinking tea and reading a book, an ancient scroll that even a martial arts master couldn't understand. The color of the tea was light, the thin lips moistened by the tea had a glossy luster, and the focused and serious eyes were fascinating. Such a graceful man from the imperial family. After hearing the other person's words, the corners of his mouth slightly curved up as he responded. Okay. Nangong Lai was surprised. Aju, what are you doing? His voice was very small so as to avoid being heard by others. Bailey Jiaju didn't say anything. Instead, he swirled the teacup in his hand and turned his head to look at her. A faint and restrained smile hung on his fair and handsome face, revealing a thick perverted aura. When Nangong Lai saw this, he began to have goosebumps all over his body. When the retired emperor asked him to make a cup of tea, he had to make a decision based on his mood. When he was in a good mood, he would make a pot or two. When he was in a bad mood, he would directly make the retired emperor drink cold water. Like now, he was so willing to be ordered around. He was definitely addicted to being a hunter, and that prey was still dreaming. Thinking of this, he was once again glad that between the 4 great clans and the imperial family, he chose the imperial family. Otherwise, as long as he thought of confronting this man, he couldn't control his scalp from tingling. When he sat back in his seat, Beligaju was no longer reading the ancient book. He leaned back in the chair, his arm on the armrest, his fingers rhythmically tapping as if he was thinking about something important. Then he suddenly leaned over and moved close to Hellion Vivian's ear, smiling deeply. I told you to get up, do you get any money? Hellion Vivian only felt a chill in her ear, it was numb and somewhat itchy. Only when she opened her lazy eyes did she know that because of Yuan Xiaoming, she made a stupid mistake again. No money. Hellion Vivian yawned. There is a free lunch, do you want to go now? The corners of Beligaju's mouth were always curled up, and there was an incomprehensible shadow in his faint smile. All right, it just so happens that I don't have money to eat. Cough cough cough. Nangong Lai spat out a mouthful of tea. Your Highness, how can you say these words without blushing? However, Beligaju didn't lie. He really didn't have any money on him. Of course, just the little ring on his finger was enough to buy a city in the border area. Everyone knew that even though the 3rd prince had lost his martial chi, he was still the retired emperor's most beloved prince, the War Dragon Empire's only holy son. Under normal circumstances, when people mentioned him, they would speak of him as high and mighty, holy and flawless, as if he was a god, etc. Most importantly, when had he ever lacked money? Nangong Lai really couldn't listen anymore. He simply turned his head away and pretended to be deaf and mute. Beligaju only reached out and brushed the non-existent dust on his white robe. His gentle voice was like mellow wine, making people intoxicated. Sco. Hellion Vivian also didn't think much of it. Her tongue licked her thin lips. She wanted to eat the roasted lamb right now with cumin and some sauce. It was crispy on the outside and fragrant on the inside. White Academy's cafeteria was very clean, and they could even appoint a chef to give them special treatment. Hellion Vivian never treated herself unfairly in this regard. A table of meat, the freshest watermelon and the best newer hong. Eating in her mouth was incomparable happiness. After all, she brought someone to eat, so Hellion Vivian also didn't forget to give Beligaju a few chopsticks of food. If there weren't too many onlookers, this meal would be even more satisfying. Hellion Vivian bit the wooden chopsticks and looked at the man in front of her with a deep gaze. At such a young age, he had cultivated into a peerless young master. His every movement carried a strong masculine charm. Those hormones, the entire cafeteria was afraid that they would soon be unable to resist. The young ladies who came to eat looked at her as if they couldn't wait to eat her up. It really was a face that attracted bees and butterflies. Hellion Vivian also felt a little strange. Could it be that every time this person came to eat he would be stared at by a group of girls? Wouldn't he have indigestion? Hellion Vivian didn't know that a certain highness had never come to any cafeteria. Ever since he entered the academy, all his basic necessities were arranged by shadow. The water was spring water from a mountain stream. The meals were all prepared by the best chefs in the imperial palace. They thought of a way to keep the food warm and sent it to the academy every night. That was why Beligaju wrinkled his thick eyebrows the moment he entered the cafeteria. Unfortunately, there were still people who didn't know the difference between life and death and came forward at this time. Really, wherever you go you can see a bootlicker. We can't help but admire him for being able to do this. Don't you guys think so? The one who spoke was Hellion May. Beside her stood several other young ladies from famous families. Apart from her, the rest were all from the superior compound. Hellion Jiaoer was also among them. Her long skirt fluttered in the wind. She was as dainty as a drop of water. Even her voice was soft and gentle. Third sister, don't say any more. Why don't you say any more? Second sister, you're just too kind. That's why you're being bullied by this evil girl. No matter what, Hellion May would never forget the matter of slapping her own mouth. She looked at Wei Wei with eyes brimming with anger. Hellion Jiaoer also didn't really want to stop Hellion May. That was because she had long wanted to give Hellion Vivian a good look. Not to mention when she saw Hellion Vivian and Beligaju together, her heart surged with unhappiness. In the end, what kind of luck did this little slut have to actually make friends with such a young master? However, no matter how handsome he was still just a poor and pedantic student. She heard that he couldn't even afford a scholar's hat. He wasn't like Murong Xiaofeng, who came from a wealthy family and was also successful at a young age. When Hellion Jiaoer thought of this, the light in her eyes turned. She made an appearance of wanting to say something but then hesitated. Third sister, eldest sister's friend is still here. It's not good to misunderstand. As she spoke, she looked at Beligaju. The corners of her mouth carried a bashful and innocent smile. Young master, we meet again. Beligaju lifted his eyelids. His deep eyes carried fine lines so deep that it made people fall into them in an instant. Hellion Jiaoer's heartstrings inexplicably trembled. Previously at the superior compound, this man was just standing there. She felt as if his body carried a magical power. Now that she was close to him, listening to his voice within the clear coldness, there was a low magnetism. It was clear and bright like the spring breeze in March. It refreshed the heart and refreshed the mind. There was a special kind of comfortable feeling. Hellion Jiaoer's heart was once again unbalanced. The corner of her mouth's smile became even wider. After parting with young master last time, I haven't seen young master again. I don't know why young master went to the superior compound to look for me that day. Since she could make Lord Murong hate this slut, if it was another man she could also do the same. Moreover, this young master had clearly taken a fancy to her from the beginning. If it wasn't for Wei Wei, this ugly woman, using money as a reward, it's likely that this young master wouldn't even spare her a glance, not to mention having a meal with her. This was simply a fantasy story. Hellion Jiaoer was confident in her own beauty. After all, in this world there was no man who could refuse her. Chapter 52. Her pretty face was slightly red as she lowered her head, like a budding lotus flower. Her beautiful eyes were shining as she looked at Bailey Jiaju, her eyelashes as dark as ink. However, what Hellion Jiaoer didn't know was that the person in front of her was none other than His Highness, the Holy Sun, who had never been attracted to women. Any beauty in front of him would be ignored. In Nangong Lai's words, if His Highness wants to look at beauty, all he needs to do is look in the mirror every day. Other people really can't compare regardless of gender. However, the strange thing was that this time, Beligaju looked at Hellion Jiaoer's face and hesitated for a while. Hellion Vivian frowned. She didn't think that the other party was a man who only looked at the face and not the heart. If he was like other people, then there was no need to eat this meal. The longer Bailey Jiaju looked at Hellion Jiaoer, the more obvious the complacent expression on Hellion Jiaoer's face became. Both of her cheeks were suffused with a pretty pink color. Her heart was thumping and she was just about to open her mouth again. Bailey Jiaju rested his chin on his hand and furrowed his brows seriously. He asked unhurriedly, "Who are you?" His voice was very pleasant to listen to. It was cool and languid with a unique elegance. Anyone who heard it would find it enjoyable. But, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? After hearing these three words, Hellion Jiaoer's small face lost all color in a flash. Her pair of hands firmly pinched her handkerchief. The eyes that looked at Bailey Jiaju also changed from bashfulness to astonishment. In the end she was so embarrassed that she wished she could just turn around and leave. Hellion Vivian was also stunned. She turned to look at Beligaju's evil smile. This man definitely remembered Hellion Jiaoer. It was because he remembered her that he deliberately asked this question. Amazing, too amazing. If it weren't for the others, Hellion Vivian really wanted to give him a thumbs up and give him a thumbs up. It was rare to see such a black-bellied person in ancient times. Beligaju naturally noticed Hellion Vivian's gaze on him. He curled his lips at her with a devilish smile. For a moment Hellion Vivian wondered if she should stay away from this man. After all, being too smart was dangerous. In the end, Beligaju knew what she was thinking when he saw her fox-like appearance. His smile disappeared and his eyes were very confused. What's wrong? Nothing. Hellion Vivian felt that she was overthinking. It was probably because the sense of crisis she felt when she first met this man was too strong, so she was always vigilant around him. Thinking about it carefully, this child was not bad. She should not have any opinions about others. Eat more. You don't know the others, so don't bother. All right. Beligaju responded faintly, but his lowered eyes were cold. He didn't expect that this little thing would still have doubts about him even after he had disguised himself to this extent. Disappointed? How is that possible? The more cunning the prey was, the more fun it would be to tame it. Beligaju curled his thin lips and a scorching smile hung on his face. He was like a master sitting behind a tent. Because he was in control of everything, he had enough patience to wait. The most unbearable was Hellion Jiaoer. She only felt that everyone in the dining hall was looking at her, including the young ladies she had befriended at the superior compound. She, Hellion Jiaoer, had lived for so long, but this was the first time she had lost so much face. This made Hellion Jiaoer so angry that her hands trembled, but she didn't know how to vent her anger. Second sister, what do you have to say to this man who can't even afford a scholar's hat? Hellion May had stayed in the defense department for so long. Even if she was stupid, she still knew that she had to help Hellion Jiaoer get out of this predicament. She looked at Hellion Vivian with disdain. They're nothing more than passing hills. Hellion Jiaoer received Hellion May's message, and immediately changed her expression into one of grievance. I only saw that this young master's clothes were shabby. Forget it, forget it. We don't have the same background, so I was meddling. Shabby? Hellion Vivian's elegant eyebrows wrinkled into a knot. It was fine if they talked about her, but now even the people by her side were ridiculing her. Did they really think that she wouldn't get angry? Hellion Vivian held the bamboo chopsticks in her hand, and a trace of hostility flashed through her clear eyes. Eunuch Sun, who had just entered the dining hall with the superior compound's great master Jing Wang, was so scared that he almost threw away the horsetail whisk in his hand when he heard the word shabby. Seeing this, great master Jing was very baffled. Eunuch Sun, what's wrong with you? Do you think that the academy's dining hall isn't good? Regarding this point, Eunuch Sun can rest assured. When the royal family arrives, there will be a special chef here to prepare the imperial meal for His Highness. As he spoke, he stroked his white beard and smiled. Actually, Eunuch Sun didn't need to personally come here. There's this old man here, so there won't be any problems. Eunuch Sun wanted to cry but had no tears. Did you think that I was willing to come here? I accompanied the royal troops at the foot of the mountain and waited for a whole day. Now that I've waited until now, the person has appeared, but he's wearing a green gown and white cloth, blending into a group of students. When he just entered the dining hall, the pit of his stomach was already trembling, okay? He swallowed 2 heart-saving pills in a row, and only then did he not lose control and scream out loud. How could His Highness, who should have stayed in the imperial palace, appear here? Why didn't he even say hello? He didn't have the slightest bit of preparation in his heart. He still hadn't finished looking at the layout of the academy, and he still hadn't gone to the dean's side. He still hadn't had time to reply to retired emperor's letter. In short, why the fuck didn't anyone inform him that the royal family had already entered White Academy, and had even become an ordinary student? Could he return to the imperial palace right now and report to retired emperor that the royal family had already been found? After Eunuch Sun thought of this point, his entire person became excited. Just as he wanted to take a step forward, he was nailed to the ground by Beligaju's indifferent gaze. That gaze was extremely cold, and within that bewitching indifference was written a warning. Eunuch Sun was such a spirited person. He had spent most of his life in the imperial palace. Every word and action of his master, even if he couldn't guess 100%, he could still figure out 70%. Right now, His Highness clearly didn't want him to go over. Eunuch? Eunuch's son? Great Master Jing saw that he was staring at a point in a trance, and couldn't help but follow Eunuch's son's line of sight to look over there. Then he smiled rather complacently. Is Eunuch's son looking at that genius young lady of the Hellion family? Right now, she's already this old man's entry-level disciple. Eunuch's son was originally still fretting about how he should pretend that he hadn't seen His Highness, but this superior compound's great master actually gave him a good excuse. He chuckled and nodded his head, forcing himself to withdraw his gaze from His Highness' body. He opened his mouth and said, I've long heard that the second young lady of the Hellion family is as beautiful as a fairy. Her temperament is adorable, and she's different from the young ladies of ordinary families. Seeing her today, she's indeed extraordinary. The great master is truly fortunate to have accepted a disciple with boundless prospects. You flatter me. Great Master Jing promptly waved his hand, but the smile on his face didn't diminish in the slightest. This child is actually intelligent. When it's time to select a consort, I hope Eunuch's son will take care of her a bit more. Hearing the two words, select consort, everyone in the dining hall turned to look at them, including Hellion Vivian. Chapter 53. Seeing everyone's gazes, Eunuch's son only felt a prickle in his back. This Minister Jing couldn't have brought up the matter of consort selection at any other time, but he just had to bring it up now. If he continued, maybe the royal family would really misunderstand that he'd received benefits from someone behind his back. Thinking of this possibility, Eunuch's son immediately looked towards Beligaju's direction. His eyes sparkled with determination. Your Highness, you must believe in me. I'm loyal to you and will follow you to death. I've never accepted ministers. Cough cough, although I occasionally accept them, I won't accept them in front of you. Beligaju minded his own business and drank his tea. He didn't look at Eunuch's son as he absent-mindedly played with the white porcelain teacup between his fingertips. It was as if it was transparent. Eunuch's son turned his back and almost burst into tears. He was disliked by His Highness. Minister Jing, who was closest to him, furrowed his brows in confusion. What's wrong with Eunuch's son today? Ever since the dining hall, he's been acting weird. Having missed the opportunity to attack, Hellion Vivian simply put down the bamboo chopsticks that she was about to raise. She wasn't stupid enough to make a move in front of Minister Jing. Before entering the academy, the dean had clearly said that doing bad things was fine, but absolutely couldn't be caught. This Minister Jing normally looked down on them from the inferior compound. He looked at everyone with a contemptuous attitude. Being so amiable like today was truly rare. This also showed that the old eunuch at his side wasn't simple. Hellion Vivian fiddled with the bamboo chopsticks in her hand, but her thoughts were pure. Minister Jing actually smiled and waved towards Hellion Jiaoer, saying, Why haven't you come quickly to greet Eunuch's son? Hellion Jiaoer was also an expert in this field. She promptly walked over like a lotus flower, faintly smiled and was just about to open her mouth. Eunuch's son immediately exclaimed, Miss Jiaoer, don't be like this. Aren't you tormenting me? The matter of His Highness's consort selection isn't something that we, as servants, can say anything about. As he spoke, his eyes flickered as he glanced in the direction of Beligaju from time to time. Beligaju still didn't look at him, but he finally changed his posture and leaned back lazily on the wooden chair. Eunuch's son's heart couldn't calm down. He really wanted to kneel in front of his master, hug His Highness's thigh and cry. But after all, he was a eunuch who had been in the palace for many years. He was very good at observing people. He also knew that if he went over now and exposed the identity of His Highness, he would die even more miserably than now. Therefore, Eunuch's son could only brace himself and continue to deal with the old man and young man in front of him. Hellion Jiaoer certainly wouldn't believe these words of his. A long time ago she'd already heard her grandfather say that although these eunuchs in the imperial palace were lowly, they still couldn't be underestimated. Especially this one in front of her whose surname was Sunday. Many times his words represented the intentions of those above. Clinging to him was equivalent to directly clinging to that highness. That's why she had to greet him with a smiling face. Otherwise, how could a eunuch like him who couldn't be brought to the table, be worthy of such treatment from her? Eunuch's son is too modest. Who in and out of the court doesn't know Eunuch Sun's ability? A few days ago I followed grandfather into the palace and saw Eunuch Sun from afar. At that time, Eunuch Sun was accompanying His Highness the Third Prince, serving him in every aspect. If Jiao Heir has the opportunity to enter the palace in the future, there are some things that Jiao Heir doesn't understand that I'll need Eunuch Sun's guidance. Helian Jiaoer said these words bashfully. Her voice became softer and softer and her cheeks became crimson. How could Eunuch Sun not understand her meaning? During this period of time the Su family had given him many benefits. However, he wasn't a little eunuch who had just entered the palace. What benefits he should take and what benefits he shouldn't take he was very clear in his heart. This Helian family's second miss actually had some good looks. Her background and appearance were all presentable, especially that pair of eyes that seemed to be brimming with tears. He pondered whether or not His Highness would like this type, so he kept an eye on her. After all, it was hard to say who would be favored in the future and who wouldn't. Since these benefits couldn't be refused, he would accept them all. It would also save him from not being able to get anything good when the time came. Of course, everything he did was always thinking of his master. If it was those who were ugly and had bad backgrounds, he wouldn't even mention them in front of His Highness. However, these were all his thoughts before coming to the cafeteria. Now he only prayed that His Highness would spare his old life on account of his many years of careful and conscientious work. Eunuch Sun's hands trembled as he looked towards Baligaju's direction again. Helian Jiaoer saw that he didn't speak and was somewhat unhappy in her heart. She had already lowered her status to give this old thing face, but this old thing didn't even open his mouth. What was the meaning of this? Eunuch Sun? What are you looking at? Helian Jiaoer's patience seemed to have run out. Seeing that he was always distracted by Helian Vivian's table, her long, shapely eyebrows slightly twisted. Does Eunuch Sun know that young master? No. Eunuch Sun saw that His Highness's eyes had instantly turned cold. His heart and liver trembled and he quickly put on a smile. I only felt that he looked familiar. After looking carefully, I discovered that I had mistaken him for someone else. This pair of eyes is getting more and more blurry. Helian Jiaoer saw that the atmosphere was good and also followed with a smile. I am. Eunuch Sun can't possibly know that young master. I also don't know what happened to the academy this year, recruiting so many commoners. It's normal for Eunuch Sun's eyes to be blurry. After Eunuch Sun heard this, his smile became even more unnatural. This time he didn't even have the courage to look at the commoner. His palms overflowed with thin layers of sweat. Let's go stroll around somewhere else. It's too noisy here. Minister Jing's pure white sleeves moved and his voice carried a smile. Eunuch Sun pleased? Eunuch Sun immediately nodded. His appearance of wanting to leave as soon as possible made the others very puzzled. How could they know that if they continued to talk he would really not have a corpse left? Minister Jing also didn't stay any longer. He only called for Helian Jiaoer to accompany them. After the distinguished guest left, the dining hall returned to its usual atmosphere. Helian Mei coldly glanced at Helian Vivian. Some people, always overestimate themselves and have delusions of comparing themselves with second sister. She doesn't properly look in the mirror, thinking that everyone else is like her and only has eyes for the air. That's good. Second sister is going to become the third imperial consort, while a certain person has become a second-hand good whose engagement has been broken off. After she finished speaking, she quickly covered her mouth and reached out to lightly hit herself twice. Look at this mouth of mine. Big sister, I wasn't talking about you. However, as a younger sister I have to remind you. Even if no one wants you, you shouldn't find a poor and pedantic man to make do with yourself. Rather than this, you might as well say a few words to the heir. In any case, you've already said a lot of things before. Maybe the heir will be soft-hearted and forgive you. Chapter 54. Helian Mei laughed heartily as she asked the young lady standing behind her. They were holding handkerchiefs, their thin lips slightly curved. They looked at Helian Vivian as if they were looking at a pile of mud that couldn't be lifted up. Helian Mei proudly raised her chin. I won't say any more. The environment here is not good. Let's go find the chef to give us some special treatment. Let's go, sisters. Another string of light and ear-piercing laughter. However, before Helian Mei's foot could take a step, she saw that her whole body seemed to be out of control. With a bang, she knelt on the ground. It was unknown whether it was the leftovers in front of her, but her face and hair were covered in oil from the fall. Miss. The maid beside her quickly went to support her, but she couldn't do anything. My face, my hair. Hellion Vivian, just you wait. Hellion Jiaoer couldn't control herself and screamed. She crazily rushed out of the dining hall. Hellion Vivian thoughtfully looked at the bamboo chopsticks that she hadn't used yet. She slowly looked at Beligaju's slightly condemning eyes and immediately expressed her position. It wasn't me. Is that so? Beligaju took back his hand. The water on his fingertips hadn't dried yet. He calmly wiped his hand with a white towel. Hellion Vivian believed that she was a good child who didn't lie. I wanted to help, but before I could, she fell. Beligaju's tone was indifferent as he sipped a mouthful of herbal tea. The ground was too slippery. Hellion Vivian nodded. Indeed. AI, speaking of which, it's a bit uncomfortable if I don't do it myself. How could she fall? On this side, Wei Wei was still at a loss. On the other side, Shadow, who was hiding in the dark, fiercely twitched the corner of his mouth. He didn't know why, but he always felt that the smile on the corners of his master's mouth made people feel very, very cold. He definitely wouldn't believe some nonsense like the ground is too slippery. His Highness must have made a move. But thinking about it carefully, Hellion Jiaoer is going to marry the third prince. It's quite a good thing. Hellion Vivian seemed to have thought of something and suddenly smiled. Beligaju tightened his grip on the teacup and his voice became cold. Make people happy. Hellion Vivian looked at him meaningfully. Don't tell me you don't know the reason. Shadow, who was hiding not too far away, stiffened. Why did he have a very bad premonition? This Hellion family's eldest daughter wouldn't say some shocking words to criticize His Highness to his face, right? Shouldn't he have stopped him? So that His Highness wouldn't be in a bad mood after hearing it? As if he was aware of his thoughts, Bailey Jiaju turned towards Shadow's position and glanced at him. That pair of ascetic cold eyes carried a thick warning. And Ing immediately shrunk back and his back overflowed with cold sweat. The man turned his head. The side of his face was suffused with a graceful radiance. With a light tone, he casually opened his mouth. I really don't know. He actually wanted to hear the reason why she would be happy if someone else married him. Then I'll tell you this, but you can't tell anyone else. I suspect that the third prince, Hellion Vivian looked left and right, then lowered her voice. It's very possible that he has homosexual tendencies. And Ing almost couldn't breathe and choked to death in the corner. Homosexual tendencies. His Highness. He had a penchant for men. And Ing raised his head and looked at the man's face not too far away, trembling with fear. His heart felt cold. Oh no, this time His Highness will definitely strangle this Hellion family's eldest daughter to death. This was even more unbearable than using 10 taels of silver to buy His Highness' kiss. Beligaju also stared blankly. His good-looking thick eyebrows wrinkled as if he didn't dare to believe what he heard. Not knowing if it was because of anger or something else, he unexpectedly smiled demonically. What did you say? I said that the third prince, that guy, might have homosexual tendencies. Hellion Vivian sized up the man with a glance, her thin lips slightly curved. Hellion Jiaoer marrying over won't gain any benefits. You, on the other hand, if you can also participate in the consort selection, you'll definitely be chosen. Relying on your face, seducing that third prince is still not a problem. Good, very good. What a good thing to be chosen. What a good thing to be seduced is still not a problem. Beligaju's long and narrow peach blossom eyes dangerously narrowed, carrying an unclear light. Where did you find out that the third prince has homosexual tendencies? Everyone knows that third prince has never been close to women. It's said that even the people who served him in Ghost Palace were all youngsters. If it wasn't for him being gay, he's a young and vigorous man. At the very least, he should have a servant girl to accompany him in bed, right? Hellion Wei Wei's suspicions were also well-founded. However, this conclusion made Beligaju coldly laugh in his heart. There will be a day when he will let her properly experience his young and vigorous. Hellion Vivian saw that the man didn't speak and thought that he was shocked by the secret she revealed. Sure enough, no matter if it was the ancient era or the modern era, no matter if it was a man or a woman, regarding this kind of matter they would always enjoy gossiping. Hellion Vivian revealed an I understand expression and patted Beligaju's shoulder. You don't have to be too surprised. If you feel that you can't hide this news after hearing it, you can also tell other people. Relax. Beligaju indifferently glanced at the hand she placed on his shoulder. His thin lips curved into a half-smile. I will find an appropriate time to tell other people. However, that other person wasn't anyone else, but you. When Hellion Vivian heard this, she was just about to say something, when she heard a burst of muffled laughter from the small door on the left. Hellion Vivian looked at Nangong Lai, who was standing at the door, and raised her eyebrows. Nangong Lai raised his hand and swallowed the laughter in his throat with great difficulty. He cleared his throat. You guys continue to discuss, continue. Don't worry about me, you can completely treat me as if I don't exist. Fortunately he came back early. Otherwise he would have missed such a good show. It was simply too interesting. When he returned, he must personally ask Aju what it felt like to hear someone say that he was gay. Pfft. No, he wanted to laugh again. What is he laughing about? Hellion Vivian was very puzzled. Beligaju indifferently looked at Nangong Lai. He raised the teacup in his hand and lightly took a sip. He is laughing at his own death. Nangong Lai's body suddenly stiffened. However, Beligaju paused and suddenly laughed. I think that the third prince must be very, very interested in what you said. How could I be stupid enough to say this in front of him unless I don't want to live anymore? Hellion Vivian indifferently gnawed on the newly arrived roasted lamb chop. He was very disapproving. Nangong Lai and Shadow laughed at the same time. Then what are you doing right now? It's already too late, you definitely. You are definitely dead. Beligaju unexpectedly curved his pale lips. That kind of smile was arrogant and charming, as if he had found a very interesting toy. Chapter 55. A smart hunter would always treat his prey with extraordinary patience. Bailey Jiaju displayed this point incisively and vividly. He didn't do anything to Hellion Vivian. After the two people finished eating, they went to do their own things. The difference was that after Hellion Vivian left, Beligaju turned the black jade thumb ring on his finger and coldly ordered the kneeling Shadow. Follow her and see who she has been in contact with these 2 days. Yes. Shadow accepted the order and retreated. Nangong Lai touched the bridge of his nose and took a step forward. Before he entered the inferior compound, he saw Eunuch Sun in the most remote corner of the compound. He was like an ant in a hot pot, walking back and forth with a horsetail whisk. The back of his collar was full of sweat. It was clear that he had been here for a long time. After seeing them, Eunuch Sun's eyes lit up. With a thump, he knelt on the ground. Your Highness. Beligaju's voice was indifferent. Eunuch Sun is the third prince's favorite. How can you kneel just like that? Hearing this, Eunuch Sun almost burst into tears. Your Highness. Was Master making fun of him? He was about to be scared to death. Get up. Beligaju casually took 2 steps forward. From afar he could hear 4 cold words. Just this once. Eunuch Sun's scalp tightened. He quickly swallowed his saliva and respectfully responded, yes. Seeing that the crisis was resolved, Nangong Lai returned to his casual appearance. Eunuch Sun, long time no see. How did you provoke your master? Young Master Lai. Eunuch Sun saluted and looked back and forth at his clothes. Nangong Lai naturally noticed his gaze. With a wicked smile, he tugged at his green and white robes. I look handsome like this, right? Your master's idea was to disguise myself as an ordinary student so that I could flirt with those young ladies. Hee. Eunuch Sun cursed in his heart. The one who wanted to flirt with the young ladies was clearly you. Nangong Lai let out a long sigh. It's also wrong to be too handsome. I'm already dressed like this, but I still can't resist falling in love at first sight. The corner of Eunuch Sun's mouth fiercely twitched for a moment, and a fake smile appeared on his old face. This old servant remembers that retired emperor once said that the vice principal of White Academy this year should be you, young Master Lai. Cough. Nangong Lai heavily coughed. Anyways, I need to first familiarize myself with the academy's environment. In addition, I need to properly protect your family's master. You don't know how much hatred has been stirred up ever since Aju entered. Those people from the superior compound have long found Aju unpleasing to the eye. Right now they're holding back their energy. How can I abandon your family's highness at this time, When Eunuch Sun heard this, he wasn't anxious but angry. Who dares to look down on his highness? Let's go look for them now. A bunch of little bastards want to rebel, don't they? Nangong Lai rubbed his chin. That Jingwu Wang who accompanied you to eat today is the mastermind. Eunuch Sun's neck shrunk back. Looking at his family's highness gaze that fell on his body, the cold sweat on his forehead overflowed again. Your Highness, this old servant swears that this old servant really isn't familiar with him at all. As he spoke, he glanced at Nangong Lai again. Young Master Lai, you're basically pushing this old servant into the fire pit. After going around in such a big circle, it was all for the sake of trapping him. How could that be? Nangong Lai extended his hand and placed it on his shoulder. He devilishly winked his left eye. You can rest assured that your family's master is clear in his heart. He doesn't need anyone to push him. This time, Eunuch Sun's entire body stiffened. His family's master's pair of eyes were so mysterious and unpredictable that it really made people's legs go weak. Alright, don't waste any more time. Your family's master still needs you to do something. Nangong Lai unrestrainedly withdrew his hand. Baligaju's tone was still indifferent as before. What excuse did you use to leave the superior compound? This old servant said that he ate too much and needed to go to the toilet. Eunuch Sun hastily said. Your Highness can rest assured. Even if this old servant was given 100 guts, this old servant still wouldn't reveal your identity. Baligaju glanced at him. You've been in the toilet long enough. You can go back now. Eunuch Sun opened his mouth and finally clenched his teeth. Your Highness, regarding the consort selection. He originally wanted to say, Your Highness and retired Emperor have been playing hide-and-seek for such a long time. When do you plan to end it? The Imperial troops have already been waiting at the foot of the mountain for 2 days. If you continue to wait, you'll be discovered sooner or later. But forgive him, he really didn't have the courage to ask. At dusk, this Highness will go down the mountain. Having heard this, Eunuch Sun incredulously raised his head. He only had time to see the fluttering sleeves. The sun was setting in the west. It was still the same old place. In the sparsely populated courtyard, many ancient scrolls were placed on the bookshelves. The old man was sitting at a high place, looking at the finished meditating Hellion Vivian with satisfaction. He reached out and stroked his beard. Because her meridians had been damaged, every time Hellion Vivian advanced, her face would turn white from the pain. This time was no exception. Her forehead was full of sweat. Girl, if you're too tired, take a rest first. Huan Mingxiang had never seen a girl like this child. Smart and willing to endure hardships. Hellion Vivian smiled, leaped up and reclined on the chaise lounge. She lazily stretched her waist. I can sleep here. At night I'll have the energy to eat and drink. Eat and drink. Huan Mingxiang wrinkled his white eyebrows, seemingly inadvertently inquiring. This old man heard that the royal family is coming to White Academy. The young ladies of other families are all thinking about how to succeed in the selection. What? You're not on the consort selection list? Hellion Vivian yawned, her voice vague. There is, but I personally am not very interested in marrying. Moreover, a man like the royal family is completely not my cup of tea. Good girl, it's great that you can think like this. Huan Mingxiang immediately stood up, as if he had met a confidant in his life. That person is good-looking, but he's too hard to fight. You can't expect him to have any normal logical thinking ability. Whatever you say, he'll act as if he didn't hear it. If you stay with him for too long, you'll be angered to death by him. After Hellion Vivian heard this, she rubbed her chin and expressed her regret. It seems that besides that good-looking face, the royal family doesn't have any other good points. It's good that you understand. Huan Mingxiang patted her shoulder, rather gratified. Don't be confused by his face. Hellion Vivian smiled. I really couldn't tell that the royal family would be a pretty boy. When Shadow heard this last sentence, his foot clattered and he almost fell from the tree branch. He simply couldn't believe his ears. What did he just hear? Pretty boy? They said that His Highness was a pretty boy. No, he had to fly back and report to His Highness. After a while, in a corner of the inferior compound, amidst the lingering smell of sandalwood, only a vague figure could be seen, in the middle of being served and dressed. He seemed to have just woken up. His voice carried a unique magnetism and hoarseness. Pretty boy? Chapter 56. Your Highness, this isn't what this subordinate said. This subordinate is only reporting. Shadow wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. Bailey Jiaju unhurriedly straightened his sleeves. He was still sitting in an indifferent manner, but he gave people a kind of majesty of a monarch overlooking the world. Those two people are actually birds of a feather. Yes, yes. Shadow answered while lowering his head. He really didn't know what to say. Before, those two people didn't speak at all, but because they mentioned Your Highness, they seemed to have found a common language. Your Highness, what kind of enmity did you have with Master Huan, to make him blacken you like this? Continue to watch. If there are any problems, come and report to me. Baligaju gracefully propped up the side of his face, just like a rare breed of Persian cat. Every movement of his showed his nobility. Shadow lowered his eyes. He first walked a few steps outside, then turned back. He endured and endured, but in the end he couldn't help but ask, Your Highness, that year when Master Huan wanted to accept you into the battle spirit forces, why did you refuse him? Baligaju yawned again and said in an indifferent tone, Because I promised him I had to get up early. Because I promised him I had to get up early. Because I promised him I had to get up early. Because I promised him I had to get up early. Your Highness, because of this reason you offended 3 generations of elders. Huan Mingxiang. Shadow's face stiffened and 3 lines slid down his forehead. The other shadows hiding in the dark glanced at each other, their eyes filled with obvious speechlessness. Their Great Highness, sure enough, everything he did was unexpected. Baligaju didn't take this seriously. He closed the ancient book in his hand and stood up from the wooden chair. Time's up, leave the hospital. Yes. When it came to serious business, the shadows all had serious expressions. Like ghosts, they scattered and hid in every corner of the academy. At the foot of the mountain, a purple gold palanquin blocked all the light, luxuriously standing still under the shade of a tree. That palanquin was surprisingly large, and outside the palanquin were suspended tassels. Beside the palanquin stood a total of 8 shadow guards in dark clothes. They held scimitars in their hands and wore fur coats. As their cloaks fluttered in the wind, there was an indescribable coldness. The palanquin servants were dressed very well. They did not look like ordinary officials at all, but they were more low-key than expected. However, the strictness in their movements was not something that could be done by just anyone. That was an aura that only the royal family could support. All of a sudden, the steed let out a long neigh and everyone stood up. That person casually walked over from the mountain, one hand in his pocket lazily, the other playing with the silver mask on his fingertips. His side profile was handsome as if it was carved by a knife, full of indescribable nobility, like a broken crystal, handsome beyond compare. A muffled sound rang out. The shadow guards in dark clothes knelt on the ground in unison, and the scene was indescribably soul-stirring. Your Highness. Baligaju looked at everyone coldly. With a turn of his finger, a silver mask covered his face and only 2 words were written on it. Admission. Yes. Another muffled sound rang out, and the shadow guards in dark clothes returned to their previous positions. They held scimitars, mounted their horses sideways and crushed all the fallen leaves on the ground. The lanterns were lit and the night scene was flourishing. This kind of prosperity could only be found at White Academy. In order to welcome the distinguished guests, the elders of the superior compound had arranged everything early on. The servant girls and servants shuttled back and forth, holding fruit platters and eating brocades. Although they were in a hurry, they were orderly. Each of the young ladies from influential families had their skirts fluttering in the wind. Their figures were like willows and their facial features were picturesque. Located in this red-walled and blue-tiled courtyard, they were like blooming flower stamens. Among them, only Hellion Vivian did not dress up. She was still wearing the Academy's green and white robes, but she did not wear a scholar's hat. She held a book in her hand and yawned from time to time. Different from Hellion Vivian, the other young ladies' hearts were beating extremely fast. Their hands were holding handkerchiefs tightly and their faces were bashful. Their eyes were jumping with impatience. One had to know that the person coming in a moment was from the royal family, a man that many young ladies yearned for even in their dreams. For today there were already many people secretly working hard. Although nothing could be seen on the surface, underneath there were indeed hidden waves surging. This kind of banquet actually gave them the opportunity to form cliques and cliques. The smart people were exchanging greetings with each other, laughing and whispering. Many of the young ladies surrounded Hellion Jiaoer's side, inquiring her about what the elders had said. Her clear and melodious voice was actually very pleasant to hear. Hellion Jiaoer curved her lips into a smile, like the moon surrounded by stars. Her mood was originally very good, but when she saw Hellion Vivian in the corner, her eyes suddenly tightened. Why did this slut also come? People from the inferior compound simply did not have the qualifications to participate in the consort selection. What's more, she had already made arrangements with her grandfather. Right now, on Eunuch Sun's register, Hellion Vivian should have long been removed. Why did she appear here? Hellion Jiaoer clenched the handkerchief in her hand. Her delicate little face was suffused with a cold intent. When everyone saw that she had stopped, they naturally also looked in the direction she was looking at. Isn't this the eldest Miss Hellion who was chasing after the heir 2 days ago? Truly, seeing once is better than hearing 100 times. She's involved in everything. The girl who spoke was also a student from the superior compound, the Minister of Revenue's Fong Ting Ting. She was bosom friends with Hellion Jiaoer. She looked gentle and beautiful, but her words were full of harshness. Relying on her family's power, she had previously bullied Hellion Vivian. In any case, she was only an orphan and there was no one who would stand up for her. Fong Ting Ting saw this point and laughed mockingly. Some people really should have a bit of self-awareness. They don't know what kind of occasion they should come to and what kind of occasion they shouldn't come to. Their hearts also don't know how to weigh the pros and cons. Hellion Jiaoer pulled on her sleeve, white teeth biting her lip, with a face of embarrassment. Sister Fong, don't say any more. Second sister, don't stop Sister Fong. Some people just need to be beaten. Hellion Mei said while gnashing her teeth. It was all because of this slut that she had a cut on her forehead, and had no choice but to let down her hair. She couldn't even comb her hair. Originally, today was a good opportunity to stand out because not only would the third prince appear, even those noble young masters would also appear. She had admired the legendary young master Lai for a long time, so much so that she hurriedly ordered a set of lake blue brocade long dress, just so that she could dress up beautifully. But all of this was ruined by Hellion Vivian, this little slut. Fong Ting Ting patted her hand and glanced at Hellion Vivian with disgust, as if she was some kind of evil trash. All right, if you don't want to say it, then don't say it. In any case, I, as your older sister, also disdain to lower myself to the same level as a pair of broken shoes that have been rejected. Hearing Ting Ting say this, I actually feel that it's strange. A girl who has had her marriage annulled doesn't have the qualifications to choose a consort, right? The other young ladies from aristocratic families also followed suit. She has curried favor with Grandmaster Jizun. Wouldn't everything be settled if Grandmaster Jizun put in a few good words for her? That's true. Hee, but this kind of girl, I reckon that the third prince won't even give her a glance. Wave after wave of ridicule. Hellion Jiaoer stood among them, lightly hiding her smile, her beautiful eyes looking at Hellion Vivian, waiting to see her make a fool of herself. Chapter 57. But what she didn't expect was that Hellion Vivian just sat there absent-mindedly with one hand behind her. Her green and white robes were scattered on the floor, looking indescribably beautiful. She didn't take them seriously at all. This made the Hellion Jiaoer's face change color. If it was before, this cheap woman would have already lost her temper and flipped out. That way, everyone would know that she was a spoiled brat. But now she actually ignored them like this. The Hellion Jiaoer fiercely clenched her teeth. Could it be that when she pushed her into the water tank that day she injured her brain? Had she forgotten even the most basic reaction? This cheap woman clearly went crazy when she heard words like, His Highness doesn't want her. Why was she so quiet today? Murong Chongfeng was sitting at the other end of the long table. After noticing the commotion, he didn't want to easily look at Hellion Vivian's reaction. When his eyes fell on Hellion Vivian's face, his heart twitched without warning. She actually had this kind of expression. She was like a spoiled cat, but it made people's hearts itch with coldness. Her eyes would slightly narrow because of her smile, her thin lips would flicker under the candlelight, making men want to rush over and kiss them. She was no longer that annoying sticky cream from before. Her body revealed a kind of unfathomable temperament. These past few days he hadn't seen her and also didn't think about her. Even if he did think about her, it was just to pester him. He briefly thought about all kinds of things when he met her. It was nothing more than her being noisy, pestering him and shamelessly pestering him. He was the dignified Princess Murong's heir. How could he marry an orphan who had lost her power? There were countless powerful ministers in the court, but she was the one who stuck to him. She was undoubtedly the only stain on his body. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't accept it. That was why he made that kind of decision. But he didn't think that because of a divorce letter, she would stop all of her previous actions. Even the way she spoke and looked at him was different from before. The current her actually made him feel unfamiliar. Unfamiliar to the point that he was a little at a loss. Fang Tingting naturally noticed Murong Chongfeng's gaze. She clenched the handkerchief in her hand, her heart filled with jealousy. The person that His Highness normally hated the most was that love-struck fool. How could he look at her with that kind of expression today, as if he was going to like her? She was obviously an ugly and lowly waste. If he didn't rely on the Hellion family's hundreds of years, how could that kind of lowly woman enter His Highness's eyes? Sisters, it's better for us to keep our mouths shut, lest someone becomes unhappy and runs to Grandmaster Jizun crying and complaining. Fang Tingting's words. To remind Murong Chang's what kind of woman Hellion Vivian. Sure enough, Murong Chongfeng wrinkled his thick eyebrows, his handsome face showing disdain. On the contrary, Hellion Mei was very righteous and awe-inspiring. If you want to complain, then complain. Who would be afraid of her? In this world there must always be justice. Third sister. Hellion Jiaoer tugged at Hellion Mei's sleeve again. Her pair of eyes were misty. Her long eyelashes drooped down, appearing very kind and moving. In fact, her heart was already blooming with happiness. Fang Tingting chuckled, Jiao, don't let these flies affect your mood. In a moment the third prince will be here. You're the only one who has ever come in contact with him in the palace. We'll be waiting for your good news. Sister Fang. Hellion Jiaoer bashfully stamped her foot. When she turned her head, she looked at Hellion Vivian with obvious pride. Hellion Vivian didn't even look at her. She continued to yawn lazily. She already knew that although it was a consort selection, but in everyone's heart, the answer was already certain. Beligaju would definitely choose Hellion Jiaoer. Therefore this banquet was just a formality. Fang Jing was just as the elders had predicted. A man born in the imperial family, what he valued the most was the country. Hellion Jiaoer wasn't just talented and beautiful. The power behind her also couldn't be ignored. From this point of view, the third prince was bound to choose such a woman. Even if that wasn't the case, Hellion Vivian didn't have much interest in the consort selection. She only came today to go through the motions. In any case, it had nothing to do with her. As long as she appeared at the banquet like this, she would be worthy of the position that her master fought for her in her hometown. Seeing that it was almost time, the masters had already sat down in their respective seats. The steaming hot pastries were also placed very delicately. The legendary third prince, who was supposed to be selecting a concubine, did not even show up. It really was like the saying, tall, rich and handsome had always been arrogant. Just as she was thinking this, she heard a loud voice from outside. The royal family has arrived. The entire courtyard instantly quieted down. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the door. Hellion Vivian also slowly turned her head. When that tall and straight figure appeared at the door, the faint moonlight scattered on the side of his face. He was like a god from ancient times, elegant, cold, and aloof. He was draped in a black cloak with a purple riding suit inside. His trousers were stuffed into his black war boots. The expensive robe was embroidered with a cloud dragon totem in silver. It was extraordinarily exquisite. His long black curly hair draped behind him. He didn't look feminine at all. Instead, it made him seem more languid than usual. Everyone was stunned, regardless of whether they were men or women. Their shocked gazes didn't stir up the slightest ripple on his body. His expression didn't even change. It was as if he didn't hear those sounds. His deep black eyes were like an ancient well. They were bottomless and seductive, emitting a faint sense of abstinence. He seemed to always be like this. No one could approach him. He was always indifferent, aloof. Hellion Jiaoer was most infatuated with this appearance of his. She saluted him like a girl from a noble family. Her white embroidered skirt was slightly scattered, setting off her pair of beautiful eyes. It was as if water could drip out of them. Your Highness. Hellion Vivian knew that Hellion Jiaoer did this because she wanted to show that she was different from the other beauties. She wanted to tell everyone that she and the third prince had some kind of friendship before. Minister Jing laughed heartily. He was very respectful towards Beligaju. Your Highness, please take a seat. Beligaju didn't say anything. The pair of eyes under the silver mask seemed to be looking for something. When they fell on the corner, they flashed a trace of playfulness. Eunuch's son had been paying attention to his master's reaction. He was afraid that this Minister Jing would say some nonsense again, and let His Highness thoroughly throw him into the cold palace. Therefore he was more nervous than anyone at this banquet. A thin layer of sweat had already overflowed from his forehead. Now he saw his master's thin lips smiling yet not smiling. He almost couldn't bear it and kneeled on the spot. What kind of situation was this? His master's smile just now made his scalp numb. Chapter 58. It was very obvious that Beligaju's arrival changed the atmosphere of the entire banquet. This time the dean didn't appear. Instead, Minister Jing accompanied him the entire time. Many of the great teachers were wondering whether or not the dean was going to lose his power. Although it was said to be a consort selection, the third prince didn't seem to be in a hurry. Eunuch's son was a person who could handle the situation. He didn't need Beligaju to open his mouth to take care of everything. Following Minister Jing, he was reserved. Minister Jing originally wanted to strike up a conversation with Beligaju, but when he actually saw him he was somewhat timid. He wasn't an inexperienced youngster, but in front of this young prince he didn't know why, but there was an indescribable sense of oppression. The entire banquet was divided between men and women. On the left were the young masters of the capital from the superior compound, while on the right were the young ladies from the prestigious families. In modern terms, this was an upper-class dinner party. What should be done when gathering? Just eat up. But none of them moved their chopsticks. This made Hellion Vivian feel very conflicted. She came to eat a free meal, but she didn't even get to eat a bite of dessert. This was too much of a failure. But before she could finish regretting, someone stood up from his seat. His small body was full of vigor. Master Jing, when will we start eating? I'm hungry. In a flash, everyone's gazes focused on that little person. Apart from those senior brothers and sisters from the superior compound, all the new students who had just entered the school all showed a surprised expression. They still hadn't forgotten who this little person was. When they first entered the compound, he even took a meat bun and sent a person flying with a kick. But this wasn't the main point. The main point was, how did he have the guts to pick on Master Jing's thorn at this time? Even if he had the dean's support, wasn't he a bit too impudent? Eunuch's son originally wanted to ask where this little brat came from. He didn't know how to look at the situation, but when he calmed down and looked, his hand trembled and he almost dropped the thing. Wasn't that the little Highness? How could he be here? Mom, what's up with that bald head? Where's the little Highness' silk-like black hair? Where did they go? Where did they all go? The little one did not care about how others were looking at him. His lotus root-like calves were exposed outside of his white training clothes. His cheeks puffed up as he asked again in all seriousness, when exactly is the meal? If it's late, I'll go to the kitchen and eat before coming back. Eunuch's son was speechless. Sob, sob, sob. After coming to White Academy, their family's little Highness had been starved to such a state. No, when he returned to the palace this time, he must bring his little Highness back. Jing Wu Wang saw that Eunuch's son was frowning as he looked at the little one. He thought that Eunuch's son was disgusted by the little one's rudeness. He had long found this little baldy brought by Tu Feng unpleasing to the eye. He might as well take advantage of this opportunity to teach him a lesson. Jing Wu Wang squints his old eyes, his face showing displeasure. Kong Chen, sit down. Hearing this, the little one's chubby face wrinkled into a ball. However, he didn't follow Minister Jing's words. Instead, he stood there and showed what he wanted to eat. Being refuted like this, Jing Wu Wang's old face was about to lose. He was so angry that he almost stood up. When the Hellion Jiaoer and Fong Mayor saw this, they looked at each other one after another and lightly laughed. This little senior brother, you should sit down first. If you stand up again, you'll be lacking in etiquette. At that time, the dean will also be in a difficult position. Listen to the big sisters. This kind of situation can't be allowed to have a temper. The Hellion Jiaoer followed up and said, fortunately, Master Jing's temper is good. If it was someone with a bad temper, you would have been punished. The two people's words sounded like they were helping the little one out of a predicament, but in reality, They were helping Jing Wu Wang criticize this little thing who didn't know how to appreciate favors. He was only a disciple brought by the dean, yet he was so arrogant in the courtyard. Even if his martial chi was stronger, he should have been disciplined a long time ago. How old was he? He didn't listen to anyone's words. Letting him eat this lesson now would also let him know who in the end was in charge of White Academy. Those senior brothers and sisters of the superior compound wouldn't say anything. First, they were wise to protect themselves. Second, they knew that the person brought by the dean absolutely wasn't simple. Some time ago, all the martial uncles in the courtyard had been beaten up by him. Although they didn't know who he was, they could roughly guess that he was most likely the successor of a large family. Because from the first day they entered the academy, this little one had been raised in White Academy. The people who knew were few and far between. This wasn't something an ordinary person from a famous family could do, unless they were born with an extremely illustrious background. However, right now, no matter how illustrious they were, it was useless. It was Master Jing who didn't see eye to eye with him. They also couldn't possibly offend a master of virtue and prestige in the academy for a little one. The little one looked left and right. His little face became tighter and tighter. His stomach was hungry, so his patience was extremely poor. Even his ears followed and drooped down, a sign that he was about to explode. Eunuch Sun saw this and felt distressed. He didn't know what to say, so he could only desperately give his master a meaningful glance. Baligaju lowered his eyes and played with the ring on his finger. He didn't look anxious at all. When Eunuch Sun saw this, he knew it was over. It wasn't that the little highness was done for, but rather that the Fong family was done for. Without waiting for Eunuch Sun to think about this, a cool voice sounded from the ground without any emotion. His stomach is hungry, so of course he has to eat. What's more, a child can't withstand hunger. He just wants to eat something. You guys are talking about this and that. Do you think that because the dean isn't here you can bully little senior brother? It was Hellion Wei Wei. She was standing behind the little one. Her left hand rested lazily on the little one's shoulder, sharp as a blade. She swept her gaze over everyone and finally her eyes fell on Minister Jing. Master Jing, you can't really be thinking like this, huh? Minister Jing's face turned white from that kind of gaze. Hellion Jiaoer followed up. Elder sister, how can you accuse Master Jing like this? I don't think Master Jing meant it that way. Didn't mean it that way? Hellion Wei Wei laughed and raised her eyebrows. Then I would like to ask my younger sister. Since you didn't want to take advantage of the fact that the principal wasn't here to bully little senior, then what were you guys doing just now? She thought that she was ruthless and lazy and would do all kinds of evil. If someone hit her once, she would return it 10 times over. Her purpose for coming to this banquet was very clear. She was just here to make up the numbers and not participate in any intrigue. However, she really couldn't bear to see a group of people ridiculing a little bun, a child. They really could do it. Hellion Jiaoer was stifled by her words. She didn't know how to refute, so she simply didn't say anything. This could be considered an unexpected gain. Just now she wanted to provoke this little slut, but she didn't fall for it. Now she actually stood up for a little thing. This was something she didn't expect. However, what the royal hated the most was people who didn't know how to look at the situation. She wanted to see what kind of end this little slut would end up in. Hellion Jiaoer lowered her head, and a trace of viciousness flashed through her eyes. Even if he made progress, so what? He still didn't know what to say at what time. That debauchery couldn't be removed. This was destined to be that little slut's Achilles' heel. Minister Jing seemed to have grasped this point, and he adopted the attitude of an old man. Hellion Vivian is talking nonsense. This old man only told him to sit down so as to avoid offending the royal. When Bailey Jiaju heard these words, he finally raised his eyes and very, very slowly glanced at Jing Wu Wang. Chapter 59. That gaze was extremely cold. Minister Jing was still in a daze and didn't notice the deep meaning in Baligaju's eyes. Hellion Jiaoer was looking at Baligaju's side profile. Her red lips were smiling with a thick sense of schadenfreude. The royal was getting impatient. Sure enough, Baligaju's thick eyebrows furrowed faintly and without a trace. Hellion Vivian's expression didn't change as she stood there. She had an expression that said, "If you like it, then watch it. If you don't, then punish me." She knew that these people were all waiting to see a good show. They wanted to see how she would be taught a lesson by the third prince. He didn't care. She was just that kind of person. When it was time to make a move, she would make a move. She couldn't watch such a tender little bun be bullied. She had just pinched the little bun's face. That soft touch couldn't be any better. However, what she didn't understand was why the third prince was looking at her as if he was looking at a strange auntie. Furthermore, there was a familiar playfulness in his eyes. When she wanted to take a closer look, that aloof man had already retracted his gaze. Half of his silver mask didn't reveal the slightest ripple. His entire body was sitting in a very lazy and luxurious posture. His elbow was propped up on the side as he indifferently said, "Come here." Who was the third prince calling? Before everyone could react, they saw the little one running over and calling out like a tiger, "Brother! Brother?" The crimson red on Hellion Jiaoer's face instantly retreated. Everyone's expression froze. Even Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows in surprise. She didn't expect that this little foodie was actually from the royal family. It was really surprising. This little senior brother usually only knew how to fight and eat. He really didn't seem like someone who came from the royal palace. Beligaju indifferently replied and continued to turn the ring on his finger. Even his tone was as indifferent as usual. "What does Minister Jing think seventh brother has done to offend me? You can tell me in detail." Minister Jing didn't want to say anything. He had long since been scared stiff. His legs were trembling and he only wanted to kneel. Beligaju looked at him mockingly but said to Eunuch Sun, "Eunuch Sunday, this old servant is here." Eunuch Sun bowed to receive the order. Beligaju's voice didn't change at all. It was still neither cold nor hot. "Tell Minister Fong within 3 days, I will personally come to his house and confiscate his house." "Yes." Eunuch Sun's skin tightened. Fong Tingting was dumbfounded as if she had been struck by lightning. She knelt on the ground with a thud. "Your Highness, my father has always been an honest official. You can't do this, you can't do this." Beligaju fed the little one a mouthful of jerky and then turned to look at him with a faint smile. "Honest and honest?" As soon as Hellion Jiaoer heard this, she knew it wasn't good. She wanted to tell Fong Tingting to stop talking, but she also didn't want to get involved in this muddy water. Fong Tingting had always been spoiled by her family. In a moment of desperation she shouted, "Father has done so much for the imperial court. What's wrong with receiving some money?" Hearing this, Minister Jing also became anxious. How could this Fong family's young miss be so stupid? This time it would be difficult to clean up the mess. Hellion Vivian yawned. She thought that watching a good show should be accompanied by snacks. She conveniently took a piece of pastry and put it in her mouth. Beligaju's indifferent voice sounded again. "Eunuch Sun, when you go to Minister Fong's house, bring young Miss Fong along. Let her repeat what she just said to Minister Fong so that Minister Fong will know where he made a mistake. If he raises a daughter who only knows how to eat like the eldest young miss of the Hellion family, perhaps he can still keep the head on his neck." Cough. Hellion Vivian choked on the pastry in her mouth. If this third prince wanted to punish people, then punish them. Why did he have to use her as a comparison? Moreover, he used that kind of "besides eating, what else do you know how to do?" arrogant and cold tone. However, it had to be said that this man really was ruthless enough when handling matters. Generally, if someone wanted to kill someone, they would just kill them. He still insisted on letting people know why he wanted to kill them. Wasn't this clearly showing that he wanted to add to people's hearts? Did he feel that just confiscating property wasn't enough to vent his hatred? While he was at it, he wanted to kill the Fong family as a warning to the Su family as well as Minister Jing, who was related to both families. Hellion Vivian was indeed very smart. Because Beligaju's next sentence was, "Master Jing, do you want to write a memorial and send it to the palace right now, so that Prime Minister Su and you can plead leniency on behalf of Minister Fong? This commoner doesn't dare. This commoner doesn't dare." At this time, even Minister Jing also knelt down. There wasn't a trace of color on his lips. He completely didn't have the high-spirited complacency of the past few days. Fong Tingting knew that this time her family was completely doomed. But until she was dragged away, she still didn't know what had gone wrong. They had received far more information than ordinary people. As early as several days ago, they had been waiting for the arrival of the royal family, so that they could seize the opportunity to get in touch with them. How could he have accidentally offended someone like that? And no one had ever told them that the seventh prince was also at White Academy. No matter how Fong Tingting thought about it, she couldn't figure it out. Because now, besides regret, all that was left was fear of Beligaju. Not only her, even Minister Jing didn't dare to say another word. He clearly knew that the third prince didn't do anything to him because this was White Academy. Anyone who came to White Academy had to abide by White Academy's rules. They couldn't disobey their teachers and couldn't exercise imperial power. This was the rule set by the retired emperor. From beginning to end, no one dared to violate it. Therefore, Beligaju didn't want to throw Fong Tingting into the dungeon. Instead, he let people escort her to the Fong residence in the name of asking for leave. As for the matter of dealing with Minister Fong, it was a matter outside of White Academy. The third prince didn't have any misgivings. It was White Academy's rules that saved his life. When Minister Jing stood up, his back was covered in cold sweat. His hands and feet were bound as he sat in his original position. He simply couldn't wait for this banquet to end immediately. And Helian Jiaoer was doing her utmost to make up for the consequences of standing on the wrong side just now. She softly smiled and instructed the people behind her, "Tell the kitchen to make more dishes. It's important to let the seventh prince have a good meal." After she finished speaking, she smiled at Bailey Kongchen. But the little one didn't care about her at all. With a fierce little face, he said, "Brother, there's no need to trouble the kitchen's martial uncle. I'll just eat the meat buns." Helian Jiaoer's raised hands stiffened. Her smiling face almost couldn't hold it anymore. Helian Mei immediately helped her out. "Second sister, the seventh prince is really sensible. When I was young, I ate whatever I wanted to eat. I never thought that the kitchen's master would have to work hard. Before, I didn't know little brother's identity. I just thought that this child was really steady and sensible. Just now, he was also extremely hungry, so he actually did such a cute thing." Helian Jiaoer also deserved to be called shameless for a long time. Before, she was still ridiculing the little one, but now the topic changed. Her praise was watertight. Helian Vivian was really bored listening to this kind of flattery. After eating her fill, she simply lay down on the desk nearby. Propping up the side of her face, she began to drowsily sleep. Clearly, she had already thrown the matter of the imperial consort selection to the back of her mind. The little one sitting beside Beligaju looked at her for a while. Then he turned his head and said, "Brother, look at that woman. She's asleep again. It seems like she doesn't want to become the imperial consort at all." Beligaju's tone was indifferent as he opened his eyes. It was impossible to tell whether he was happy or angry. Only that pair of long and narrow eyes under the silver mask seemed to have lost all warmth, cold and somewhat empty. Chapter 60. Eunuch's son, who was standing by Bailey Jiaju's side, just happened to see this scene. He was only thinking about how he should save the situation, so he did his utmost to raise his voice by a few decibels. "Before I left the palace, the emperor had instructed me that I wanted to see the abilities of all the young ladies. Fighting and killing is always not good. However, I also inquired from Master Jing. Every year, White Academy will allow new students to enter the spirit forest to contract with their own spirit beast. It would be better to handle this matter in advance this year. After I see the results, I can also report to retired emperor." All the subjects of the Dragon War Empire knew that the retired emperor loved the third prince the most. For so many years he had been urging the third prince to choose a consort. If it wasn't for the fact that the third prince didn't approach women, he wouldn't be without a consort at this age. Now that the third prince finally agreed to choose a consort, the retired emperor was the happiest. Regarding the consort selection, of course, he had many demands. Only when everyone heard about contracting a mythological beast, they all shrank back. Although they were all students of the superior compound, there was still a gap between people. Some people simply couldn't contract a mythological beast unless their divine sense reached a certain level. It seems that the retired emperor already knew that the White Academy produced a genius Jiao heir, so he deliberately created such a difficult problem. He simply recognized Sister Jiao heir. The Helian Jiaoer intimately pinched the face of the person who spoke. "You only know how to make fun of me. How am I making fun of you? You see, ever since the royal came in, he simply didn't look at anyone else. He kept looking at us. If he wasn't looking at you, could it be that he was looking at that dark and swarthy waist?" That person mockingly glanced at Helian Vivian, who was lying on the wooden table. "You only know how to sleep all day. Look at the things on her table, almost all of them were eaten by her. She really hasn't seen the world, Sister Jiao Air. Sister Mei, how can you bear to live with such a person in the Defense Division residence? The Hellion Jiaoer disappointedly sighed and pretended to be upset. Don't say any more. Because Big Sister's aptitude is too poor, it's hard to avoid feeling inferior. That's why she's like this. Big Sister Jiao Air, you're just too kind and beautiful. No wonder the royal family doesn't look at anyone but you. Hellion Jiao Air's face reddened slightly as she listened and said, nonsense. However, her heart was full of pride. She shyly looked at the high and mighty man. When she met his eyes, her cheeks burned even hotter. However, Beligaju never left the woman sleeping on the floor. The coldness in his eyes became more and more demonic as time passed. If he kept a pet, he would have to constantly give her a warning. If he made her feel too comfortable, she would look down on him. A good hunter certainly knows how to deal with this kind of disobedient pet. As long as her thorns are pulled out one by one, she can be at peace. With a meat bun in his mouth, Little Bald Head looked at Hellion Weiwei, who was sleeping soundly, then looked at the seemingly smiling yet not smiling Bailey Jiaju, who always gave people a kind of holy and pure existence like a god. His round tiger eyes paused, then turned toward Hellion Weiwei's direction to take another look. Then he tilted his small head and evaluated with a cold little face. Not bad. What's not bad? Eunuch Sun, who was doing his best to hold the meat bun for his little highness, twitched his mouth. Please don't be what I think. That Hellion Vivian, I've seen her go to the commerce courtyard. Little Bald Head took a big bite of the meat bun and didn't raise his head. She can make money and can support third brother. Moreover, third brother has already been taken care of by her. What taken care of? Eunuch Sun desperately swallowed his saliva. Little Highness, although your master's younger brother, you can't talk like that. You have to know that when master is angry, he won't recognize his emotions. I just don't know if she can cook. While Little Bald Head was at a loss, his small brows wrinkled. He seriously looked at Beligaju. Third brother, I still think you should consider it. It's better to find someone who can cook. What's better? Eunuch Sun chuckled twice. This was choosing a consort, not a chef. No, this wasn't the main point. The main point was, why didn't his master have any reaction at all? Eunuch Sun looked at Bailey Jiaju again. He only managed to catch a glimpse of the curve at the corner of his mouth. It was as if he had seen an interesting toy. His handsome charm was enough to make any girl fall for him. He still remembered that the last time His Highness showed this expression he was only 7 years old. In Mountain Phoenix he caught a fire qilin with his bare hands. He even trained that fire qilin into a divine beast that only ate vegetables. Fire qilin. A divine beast that didn't like meat. With just a stomp of its foot it could make a city collapse. It would always listen to someone's orders. The most ferocious divine beast in ancient times. It was reduced to a point where it could only eat vegetables. Could be imagined at that time master, cough cough, how abnormal was he? However, just like the rumors in the market, after that fire the divine beast fire qilin disappeared. Carefully counting, he hadn't seen that god of plague for a long time. However, His Highness unexpectedly showed the same evil smile as that time. Inexplicably, Eunuch Sun shuddered. In a while he had to hold his master back. He couldn't let him do anything. These were all young ladies from famous families who came to participate in the competition, not some kitten or puppy. Hey. Wait a minute. Eunuch Sun looked at Beligaju, who suddenly stood up, and his eyelids couldn't help but jump. Master, where do you think you're going? As Beligaju stood up, all the voices in the banquet disappeared. The young ladies who were nibbling on the pastries all stopped what they were doing and held their breaths as they watched the handsome and restrained figure pass by them. The light fragrance of the sandalwood dragon was faintly discernible, and it smelled so good that no one dared to profane it. Hellion Jiaoer looked at the man who was getting closer and closer to her, and her heart was beating so fast that it almost jumped out of her throat. She pretended to be reserved as she looked left and right, then bit her thin lips. Her pair of beautiful eyes looked at Beligaju pitifully. She always knew when to look at a man with what kind of attitude, so that it would arouse the other party's desire to protect her. In the past she relied on this trick to make Murong Chongfeng misunderstand Hellion Vivian, that bitch. Now she was confident that she could make the royal family put her at the top of their hearts. Moreover, wasn't she already halfway there? Just like what they said, since the royal family came in they kept looking at her. It could be seen that the royal family was not indifferent to her. Helian Jiaoer thought of this and the smile on her face became more and more bashful.